Chapter 1566. The Guardian of Flames, Corallon, was a giant with a height of 8 stories. His beard, which was several meters long, was weaved into mammoth tusks. His exposed muscles showed a strange reddish-brown color, and every inch of his skin was tattooed with strange spiral patterns, which made people wonder about the characteristics of his body. Even with the image that Onyxia sent back, it was difficult for Duque to define him as a living person or some kind of mysterious magical creature. Corallon's belly looked like he was wearing a waste bag with a pot of molten steel, and a blazing aura gushed out of it. His thick arms were wrapped in a thick iron chain that required 2 people to wrap their arms around it. It looked like he was wearing a big red shawl, but this so-called shawl immediately angered Onyxia. Roar! That was her roar, full of anger. The anthropomorphic dragon's face was full of anger. Because this shawl was the skin of a complete red dragon. The so-called buckles on the shawl were 2 huge dragon claws, buckling down from the shoulders to the giant's knees. Behind the shawl was the dragon's abdomen, covering the back of Corallon's waist, and the long dragon tail hung low behind the giant's butt. Onyxia had never liked red dragons, but she could not tolerate this desecration of the dragon's corpse. Unless a certain dragon was willing to atone for its sins, such as Talonista's, who had attacked the Alliance under the threat of Demon Soul. After Alexstrasza was freed, he had willingly died at the hands of Dylan Proudmoore. His dragon head was still hanging in the Adventurers' Hall in Iron Stove Fort. She suddenly understood why Duque assigned her to deal with a guardian who was also a demigod. When opponents with the same attributes couldn't overwhelm each other with their elements, the outcome would be decided by hand-to-hand combat. And the Guardian of Flames, Corallon, was obviously a guy with the attribute of Dragon Slayer. Onyxia was definitely not weak in hand-to-hand combat, but that was only when she had an advantage in size. If the size was similar, then the dragon's small arms and legs would be the weakness. Because of the absolute weakness in strength, once the dragon's limbs were caught, it would be very disadvantageous for the dragon to fall into a pure close combat. Of course, her strength was not comparable to that of the unlucky Crimson Dragon on Corallon. Just by looking at its size, one could tell that the Crimson Dragon was not a true ancient giant dragon. The problem was that growing from an adult dragon that was over 1,000 years old to an ancient dragon that was over 10,000 years old, the biggest improvement wasn't in strength, but in elemental control. Moreover, Onyxia did not rely on her age, but on her demigod bloodline. She had entered the level of an ancient WIRM in advance, and with the help of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, she was blessed with the power of the Earth aspect WIRM that her father, Nesario, had once given up. No matter how one looked at it, there was an element of spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. Her biggest problem was that her foundation was unstable. She was obviously angry, but Onyxia's heart fell into a very strange state of tranquility. She asked herself, what should I do? At the sight of Onyxia, Corallon burst into laughter. His loud voice shook the arched hall that was 1,000 meters in diameter, causing dust to fall from the sky. Ha ha ha. Despicable little dragon, you actually abandoned the duty that the Titans gave you and came here to covet the Titans' power. I didn't expect that after 25,000 years, the dragons have fallen so much. If it was Alexstrasza who came, the righteous Red Dragon Queen would probably have nothing to refute. After all, her brother, Nesario, had really fallen. It was Onyxia, the new dragon aspect, who was not a good dragon to begin with. She restrained her anger and showed a cynical expression. Fallen? Perhaps. I went from being a free, evil dragon that did all sorts of evil things to being a mount for the righteous guardian of Azeroth, Duck Marcus. I rode him day and night. What a fall. Corallon wanted to laugh. But thinking about it, why did it seem a little wrong? The evil dragon fell to become a mount for the righteous guardian? Why did it sound like a negative is a positive? Corallon carefully sensed and was shocked to find that Onyxia actually had the pure aura of a dragon aspect. In theory, he, who was designated as a guardian by the Titans, was essentially no different from the dragon aspect that guarded Azeroth. Corallon was a little confused. However, this was not enough for him to give up his duty. The Titans created him, and the guardian faith that was injected into his heart was something like an instinct. Coraline spoke, and his voice once again shook the entire hall. For the sake of your identity as a dragon aspect, I will give you a chance to retreat. I will not pursue you, but when you step into this place that you should not step into again, that will be the time of your death. Ha ha ha. It was hard to imagine that a black dragon could make such a crisp and melodious sound. The ridicule on Onyxia's face became more obvious. I gave up my freedom and my dignity just to obtain a future under the command of the victor. Obviously, he is the master of fate, and you are not. Coraline, right? It seems that a silly big guy like you would be a good guard for my master. Fire elemental guys were mostly hot-tempered. This was especially true for a violent giant like Coraline. Humph. With a cold snort, he directly attacked. Holding the pot of blazing lava in front of his waist, he did not know whether it was molten steel or lava, and poured it on Onyxia's head. Surprisingly, Onyxia chose to avoid it. She did not change her sinister and cunning nature at all, and the first move after the fight started was to dig a hole for Coraline. Unlike other dragons that had a single attribute, black dragons and blue dragons belonged to the dragon species that had a variety of elemental characteristics. Blue dragons liked frost the most, and in fact, they were also very good at arcane and fire spells. Black dragons were even more common. Her father's Wings of Death was proficient in the three elements of shadow, fire, and natural corrosion. Her brother Nefarian's shadow flame was actually a shadow. And she was pure fire. Most dragons and giants were straightforward and did not have so many twists and turns. Seeing that Onyxia actually used a large and exaggerated movement to dodge the flames, Coraline was excited. Ha ha ha. Little dragon that is afraid of fire, you are so afraid of fire, and you dare to challenge the guardian of fire. You are dead. Coraline waved his hand, and a huge fire meteor suddenly flew out. The huge fireball was the size of a house, exuding a terrible high temperature and heat. If it was a mortal powerhouse, in the face of this level of destructive energy, they would definitely be burned into ashes in an instant. But at this time, Onyxia suddenly rushed in. She was like a fire phoenix that was reborn from the fire, and she took the initiative to jump into the huge fireball. In Coraline's surprised eyes, she suddenly broke the fireball, and fiercely rushed in front of Coraline, stretching out her sharp front claws. Chapter 1567. If this forward thrust was an accident, then Onyxia's next move was the second accident. In a battle between giant creatures, most of the time, it would be the most violent. You attack me, I attack you. It was a battle to see who could endure it first, or who could catch the opponent's flaw and give them a fatal blow. There were very few gigantic creatures that could play tricks as well as Onyxia. Facing the black dragon's forward thrust, Coraline was surprised, but not panicked. He waved his free left hand and punched the dragon's claw. The skin and muscles of the giant's arm were as hard as steel, and his left arm, which was originally wearing a bracer, was wrapped in rings and rings of solid iron chains. This formed a double layer of protection, so he was not worried about being hurt by the dragon's claws. At that moment, the female black dragon made an unimaginable move. She suddenly flapped her wings and made a hovering motion. Its claws, which were supposed to be attacking fiercely, merely touched the giant's left arm like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Then, the entire dragon somersaulted backwards, revealing its belly. More importantly, its long and violent tail, which was full of beauty, swept towards the giant's left knee at lightning speed. Even if the black dragon princess had shrunk to the size of a human, her tail was still an extremely sharp weapon. To say that it was a meteor hammer would be an understatement. Driven by the strong and developed tail muscles, the destructive power of the dragon's tail was at least hundreds of tons. This power could easily split mountains and stones. Lifting something heavy as though it were light, and then unleashing a thunderous strike. The guardian giant, who was not known for its speed, was hit on the spot. Crack. It was the crisp sound of bones fracturing. Even with the guardian's thick skin and flesh, having his leg broken was the only possible outcome after suffering a heavy blow to his joints. This was not the end. The sharp spike at the end of the dragon's tail directly hooked into Coraline's flesh. Onyxia, who knew very well that she could not be caught, tried her best to pull away the flesh from Coraline's injured part. A small piece of broken kneecap, along with a large fragment of the cruciate ligament, was pulled out by the dragon's tail. Ah! The giant let out a tragic roar, and the ferocious giant rushed over, trying to catch the black dragon's tail. But at this moment, Onyxia actually used flash. It was something similar to a flashbang. There was no real lethality, but the film on the dragon's eye could filter this strong light very well. Coraline, who was caught off guard, was slightly shaken. The black dragon, who already had some room to spare, immediately turned around and retreated. That strike just now definitely had the demeanor of an assassin. Once the strike succeeded, he immediately fled. Despicable. Is this the power of a dragon aspect? Coraline roared as he squatted down, clutching his leg in pain. I've said it before. I'm an evil dragon. It's just that you don't believe me. The ridicule on the dragon's face became even more intense. After destroying Coraline's leg with one move, Onyxia was not satisfied. She quickly launched a second round of attacks. This time, in theory, Coraline had caught her attack trajectory, but when his left hand caught the dragon's tail, he found that he caught nothing. Mirror image, even Pharaoh, who was able to reach the Morning Star realm, knew a small spell. Everyone thought that dragons only liked to use their innate abilities and elements, but this was actually a misunderstanding. For example, Crasus, this unusual dragon, was an all-round great mage. Onyxia was good at playing with fire, but she did not only know fire magic. She was also good at using arcane magic. With such a small trick, she seized the second opportunity and swung her tail again, directly smashing the entire area near Coraline's right collarbone. Even the muscles of the shoulder were torn apart. That was all. Coraline had underestimated the shamelessness of the black dragon. Onyxia actually took out a large bottle from her space bag and smashed it on Coraline's wound. This was one of the newest products of the Alliance, named sulfuric acid, by Duque himself. Well, of course, it was not as awesome as the acid of her dead father, Nesario, but it could be mass-produced. The strong corrosive pain made Coraline jump up. The battle had officially entered the rhythm that Onyxia liked. 5 minutes later, in the depths of the Alcafon's treasury, Onyxia's dragon roar reached the door. Duque and Jaina looked at each other strangely. It was obvious that this female dragon had won, because dragons who were in a fierce battle would not have the time to use the dragon's roar as a song, let alone the tune of Ode to Joy. Feeling the changes in the elements in the air, Duque was speechless. This unmotivated female dragon definitely did not win with the purpose of testing herself. The second to win was Vashj. This was not unexpected. The 4 guardians of the Alcafon's treasury were demigod bodies to begin with, and with the blessing of specific elements, their true strength was not too strong. Among the 4 challengers, Vashj had always been the strongest. Onyxia was only a demigod body, and Vashj was a true demigod, which was already a lot stronger. As a true demigod, it took Vashj so much time to win, proving that she had really won this battle with the goal of honing herself. Onyxia returned smugly, enjoying Duque's eye roll. Vashj came back a little pathetically, but what she got was a smile from Duque. Thank you for your reminder, Master. I am even more aware of my own shortcomings. As expected, the frost element is the direction of my development. Vashj returned to her human form and bowed deeply to Duque. It's good that you understand. Vashj might be a wizard, and she was very good at using the wind element's lightning. The 4 elements of Azeroth were earth, water, fire, and wind. In the end, the element that was most suitable for her was still water. This was inseparable from her 10,000 years of life at the bottom of the sea. She was born here, and grew up here. Giving up her talent attribute just to increase her lightning power was like throwing a watermelon to pick a sesame seed. Vashj understood, and Duque was happy for her. Only those 2 left, Jaina said softly. No, Shorty's side is just like that. He won't lose if he should win, and he won't win if he should lose. Once Magni accumulates enough, he will naturally win. There are no surprises. I'm only worried about Sylvanas. Because there's only a fine line between her victory and defeat. Duque was right. A duel between two earth element experts was actually very boring. Although it wasn't a fight between noobs, the two of them didn't have many moves. Rock Guardian Alcaphon was a giant with the same body size as Kolalan. The only difference was his accessories. His right hand and legs had been replaced with something that looked like a meteor hammer, full of protrusions. Chapter 1568. Whenever Alcaphon used skills like Trample or Heavy Leap, he would often deal terrifying damage to enemies that were smaller than him. This time, his enemy was a little different. Magni was a god descending to the mortal world, but it was a god descending in a special form. He completely released the restrictions of his body, allowing the earth element to enter his body without limit. If it was any other race, this would be asking for death. The dwarves were a little special. The bold and courageous dwarves were an ancient race. They originated from the earth spirits created by the Titans in the early world using stones with vitality. Due to a disease known as the curse of flesh and blood, the dwarves' earth spirit ancestors went through a metamorphosis. Their stone hide became soft skin. In the end, these bodies of flesh and blood called themselves dwarves, and they established the powerful iron furnace castle on the snow-covered peak of Cosmodon. In a sense, dwarves were not pure living beings. They were more like half-living beings, half-elemental beings. After countless generations of inheritance and mutation, what people saw was a side of dwarves made of flesh and blood. The dwarves with the purest bloodline and the most astonishing talent could trace back to their earth spirit characteristics. For example, Magni Bronze Beard. Absorbing large amounts of earth element was a very risky method. If he absorbed an impure amount of earth element or too much, he would explode like a balloon. The result was out of his and Alcaphon's expectations. His affinity with the earth element was very high. It was rare in the world. Alcaphon was 8 stories tall, and after Magni absorbed the earth element that Alcaphon had released, he was also 6 stories tall. Alcaphon's body was rather well proportioned. Magni's horizontally developed body was still very comical even if he turned into a giant. At this time, Magni was very glad that Duque had agreed to give him, Savra's, Balrog Ragnaro's hand. Only a warhammer like this, which could be enlarged or shrunk by filling or reducing elements, was the most suitable weapon for him. Otherwise, even though he had grown so big, his weapon was still the one he had when he was more than a meter tall. It would be too small to even pick his teeth with. Looking at the blazing inferno hammer, Alcaphon frowned. Originally, I hated all intruders, but you should be an exception, because you have a relatively pure heart of the earth. It seems that I was wrong. Completely understanding the meaning behind the other party's gaze, Magni replied loudly, "No, you didn't see wrong. My heart is indeed with the earth." Archavon tapped the infernal hammer with his left finger. "Explain?" "Mother Earth bears all things. Without the earth, there would be no atmosphere. Liquid water, real wind, and prairie fire could not exist in the void. The earth was the foundation of all things. Since it's the foundation, then any changes are reasonable." Duque had brainwashed Magni for so many years, and had imbued him with a lot of scientific knowledge about transmigrators. Even if Magni didn't learn everything, he would at least know about 70 to 80% of it. Magni was actually very logical when it came to his theories. Originally, he did not expect this ancient giant, who had lived for at least 25,000 years, to understand. Who would have thought, he. Well said. Then you understand why this place is called Arcaphen's treasury and not some other treasury, right? Book 6 Chapter 17. 3. Book 6F***CK. There was actually such a thing? Seeing Magni's dumbfounded expression, Alcaphon was very satisfied. Come, don't waste time. Regardless of victory or defeat, you and I will have a long duel. Let's hope there are no other existences to interfere. I can sense a very powerful demigod entering the treasury. Azeroth, the newly promoted demigod of the Weave, Duke Marcus, is a true guardian. He must have his reasons for attacking this treasury, Magni insisted. I hope so. The two giants, one tall and one short, began to fight just like that. To be honest, a duel between earth element experts was rather boring. Low attack speed, almost no technique to speak of. Basically, you give me a blow, I'll give you a blow. The one who could not take it first would fall. If it wasn't for the fact that the two of them could use techniques like jump slash, and when they jumped, they were like two small mountains playing bumper cars in the sky. Duke, who was secretly watching them, would have probably fallen asleep from boredom. Duque turned his attention to Sylvanas and Storm Warden Amaran. The biggest difference between Amaran and the other Storm Wardens was the bright blue runes on his body that were wrapped in circles. These typical Titan runes had the most primitive wind element power. With just a thought, Amaran could easily summon wind and lightning at a designated place. Although each of the runes looked simple, such as the one on his arm, which looked like the word big, but had its head cut off, each Titan rune was actually made up of more than 100,000 tiny runes. The mysterious light inside them rippled and moved continuously. Every time a rune was activated, it was made up of 100,000 tiny runes that were arranged in different ways. The mystery contained within was something that all the mages in the Dalajan would not be able to understand in their entire lives. Amaran looked at Queen Sylvanas, who walked into the hall with Solidar Wrath of the Stars in her hand and revealed an amused expression. Very interesting. You invaders are not here purely for the treasure, but to challenge yourselves. This is the most interesting thing I've seen in the 25,000 years I've guarded the treasury. Gently bending the bow, Sylvanas revealed a stern expression. Sylvanas Windrunner, I'm here to break through my limits. Do you understand the meaning of failure? Amaran asked with a booming voice. Sylvanas lowered her head slightly. At this moment, in her mind, there was the Long Song forest that was burned by the beast men, Silvermoon City that was destroyed under the iron hooves of the Calamity Army, the Sunwell that was trampled wantonly over and over again, Orgrim, Arthas, Kill, Jaden. When she raised her head again, there was an unparalleled determination in her eyes. Yes, I understand. It's because I know how terrifying failure is that I understand the value of success. Very well, come on. A battle between people of the same element was much simpler, more violent and direct than fighting against experts of other elements. There was no probing, and there were not too many twists and turns. After reaching a certain level of strength, there would be so-called convergence. Why did so many fighter aircrafts in Duzé's previous transmigration have similar appearances? It was because there were only a few methods that followed a certain pattern. In the face of such transcendental power, the form and performance of power would be completely different. Chapter 1569. A strong gust of wind blew. The blue Titan runes on Imaran's body flashed, and a level 12 typhoon tornado appeared. The violent storm made Imaran's huge body look blurry. After all, Queen Sylvanas was only 20 meters away from this 8-story tall giant. Mortal, since you have chosen to challenge yourself and pursue the path of the divine realm, then use your body to feel the greatness of the storm. The giant's rumbling voice completely merged with the thunder. Dark clouds of unknown origin shrouded the entire dome of the hemispherical hall. It was dark and frightening. What made Queen Sylvanas' expression turn even colder was that she suddenly realized that she had lost almost all of her attacks. Arrows would be skewed the moment they left the bow. Bow techniques and parabolas were useless. This was the pure suppression of the elemental domain. Unless she made a breakthrough in the elemental domain, Amaran was an existence that she could not defeat. Retreat, retreat, and retreat again. The evasion ability that rangers were proud of was meaningless in the face of this wide area damage. The frail bodies of elves could only perish if they were pulled into the storm. Tisk, Queen Sylvanas spat on the ground. The range of the tornado continued to expand as Amalron laughed heartily. At the beginning, it only occupied the center of the hall, and now it became a large circle. At the beginning, Queen Sylvanas had a circle to move around, but in the end, it became a narrow line. Of course, she could leave the hall the way she came, but to her, that would be the worst failure. She could dodge, she could retreat, but she could not escape. Because this was her path, her heart of the strong, and her final stubbornness. Originally, she could have been a salary thief like before the incident at the dark portal. Even if she became a queen, she could have become a pure politician. She could even hide in Duque's arms and be a happy little woman. Anyway, she had her sister and Duque, who could be her umbrella to shield her from the wind and rain. I chose this path myself. It was as if she was mocking herself, but also like some sort of self-hypnosis. After saying this, Sylvanus was filled with the spiritual light of a martyr. Duque, who was watching from afar, felt worried, not to mention the Windrunner sisters, who were watching this scene in Karazhan. Ah! For a moment, Aurelia had the urge to call Duque over to save her sister. However, she saw Duque clenching his fists and gritting his teeth. At this time, Windsor held her hand and shook her head. Second sister chose the path. Both us and Duque can only support her. She's not a canary in a cage, but a petrel soaring in the storm. Yes. Aurelia nodded heavily, her eyes filled with tears. On the other side, Sylvanus moved. He didn't have any attacking stance. He didn't even take his newly acquired divine bow, which was the envy of all the Alliance's hunters and rangers. Instead, he jumped into the storm with a graceful diving posture. In the eyes of the spectators, this was undoubtedly like a moth flying into a flame and courting death. The Windrunner sisters lowered their heads, not daring to watch. Even Lor, Themar and Hadgeron, who were far away in Sin, Dorii, were mentally prepared to lose their queen. Duque had even taken out the divine artifact, Atish, and opened a short-distance teleportation portal. However, at this moment when everyone was watching, a sonorous and powerful female voice came out from the strong wind, "Don't look down on me. My surname is Wind." Fine. Swordsman. Almost everyone who was watching the battle through Duque's magician's eyes had the same reaction, first shock, then joy. In the magic mirror, Sylvanus's performance shocked the mortals. Her seemingly thin body actually spun at high speed with the whirlwind. That was a speed that was many times more brutal than being thrown into a washing machine. How many revolutions per minute? The mortals' eyes couldn't keep up with Queen Sylvanus's rotation at all. Even the rangers with the strongest eyesight could only keep up with her shadow. 50 revolutions? 100 revolutions. In any case, apart from Duque, no one could count it clearly. Everyone only saw Duque retract, Atish, and they instantly understood what it meant. The surnames in this world were different from before Duque transmigrated. In the original world, Matare represented where one was born. The surname Azeroth often represented bloodline. The Sunstrider played with fire. And the Windrunner naturally walked on the wind. But no one expected the power of the Windrunner family's bloodline to have such an astonishing upper limit. The Night Elves originated from the part of the trolls that had the most talent in elemental magic. The High Elves were the most talented in magic among the Night Elves. In order to maintain the magic talent of the next generation, in the past 8,000 years, the High Elves had used all kinds of methods to maintain the purity of their bloodline. For example, mages above the Radiant Moon level could only marry a Radiant Moon level. That was why the Silver Moon Council, a behemoth whose power, interests, and bloodline were all intertwined, was formed. Even the king couldn't fight against it. Elves who lost their ability to cast spells were seen as inferior, which was why the various ranger families that didn't have a high status in Kuel's Salus came into being. The current Sylvanus could no longer be called a simple ranger. The surging wind elemental energy on her body could be clearly felt even through the magic mirror. Because the wind had changed color. The wind in Amalron was grayish-white, and now the places that Queen Sylvanus flew at high speed had turned purplish-black. Duque froze in shock. His gaze turned to the lightning that kept flashing in the clouds above the hall's dome. The lightning that seemed fine to outsiders was actually engaged in a shocking battle of attrition. Duque was a little unfamiliar, but he still recognized this method. When Gavin Rad obtained the Wind Sword, the Wind Prince Sandran had used it. This meant that Sylvanus, who seemed to be at a disadvantage, was directly mobilizing the lightning power in the clouds. This was definitely not the power of mortals. The others couldn't even see Queen Savannah's figure clearly, but with the help of the system, Duque could clearly see that there was a purple emblem that resembled lightning reflected in Savannah's eyes. It was flashing, and was wrapped in a dim, tornado-like radiance. Amalron, who sensed that something was wrong, began to pay attention to Savannah's. An extremely uneasy feeling enveloped him. That feeling was too distant, and he didn't know how many years ago. A great existence with the same terrifying aura had almost blown him into ashes with one blow. Chapter 1570. Amalron had once thought that the Titans were omnipotent. The greatest Titan had to create something that was the greatest. Clearly, this deep-rooted understanding that he had held onto for 25,000 years was completely broken at this moment. When the Titans of the Pantheon first descended on planet Azeroth, it was during the most terrifying period of the Dark Empire. At that time, there were trolls, mantis demons, bugmen, but there were no elves. But now, a descendant of an obviously mutated subspecies actually displayed a stronger control of the wind element than him, a first-generation Titan's creation. How could he accept this? Sylvanas's rotation with the tornado was getting slower and slower, because this meant that even the wind that Amalron had created was gradually being controlled by her. Be it shock or admiration, as the guardian of the storm that controlled the source of the wind element, Amalron had no obligation to continue supporting the enemy. Very soon, the storm stopped. But Queen Sylvanas was suspended in midair. It was a powerful yet miniature tornado that was supporting her. Her long, slender, and beautiful legs were completely wrapped in the swirling black wind, and there were even lightning snakes flickering in the wind from time to time. Her brilliant golden hair had turned silver at some point, and then it was faintly dyed purple in the glow of the lightning. This is a pleasant surprise. Duke's face finally blossomed into a smile. Second sister, she, Aurelia and Windsor said in unison, "How is she?" Duque smiled as he read out the description of Queen Sylvanas in the system vision. Of course she is, the demigod of the Azeroth wind, Sylvanas Windrunner. She's a little weak. Humph. Second sister is indeed the strongest among us sisters. Windsor raised her nose. Duque, that last comment of yours is a little redundant. The sisters, whose blood was thicker than water, had single-handedly broken through the boundary between mortals and gods. In the face of such a heaven-defying achievement, Duke actually made such an evaluation. No matter how good Illyria's temper was, she was a little angry now. What else could Duque say? He could only smile bitterly. At that moment, the will of planet Azeroth had responded and accepted Queen Sylvie as the planet's demigod. If what Savannah's requested from the world was an empty domain, she would definitely be able to obtain even more resources. Unfortunately, her demigod oath was just wind. Just like when Duque was a demigod of the weave, he had to fight with Ragnaros for control of the fire element. By doing this, Queen Sylvanas was going against the big boss of the wind elemental circle, Wind Wielder Al-Akir. Yes, the Prince Thunderin who gave Gavin Rad the Wind's word was his son. Although in the original history, Sylvanas deserved to be taught a lesson and was eventually beaten like a dog by the Alliance and Horde, the two sides had yet to come into contact with each other, so it was impossible for Sylvanas to obtain many wind elemental resources. Apart from the small amount of wandering wind elements, none of the wind elements were willing to listen to her. So in a sense, the current Queen Sylvie was only the weakest of demigods. Duque shrugged. Well, let us congratulate Her Excellency Sylvanas Windrunner. She has successfully stepped into the realm of gods. From this moment on, as long as Azeroth is not destroyed, she will be in eternal existence. The so-called eternal was the true meaning of immortality. Just like the wild demigod Malorn, who had been killed by Archimonde in the ancient war, as long as the time was right and there was enough energy and the corresponding summoning ritual, he could still be resurrected for you to see. His own woman had broken through to the level of demigod with her own strength. Even if she was the weakest, at least this spirit was worthy of celebration. Duque was still watching, but his mood had changed from the initial nervousness to relaxed and joyful. If 99 out of 100 people had to die, and only one survived, it would be called a grand escape. If the 99 people who died and the one who survived could all start over, it would be called a game. Different starting points meant different mentalities. Dooku and the other onlookers had already gone from feeling as if they were experiencing it themselves, to being onlookers. Of course, Queen Sylvanas was Queen Sylvanas. She was arrogant and unyielding, and she persisted to the end. Whether it was in the past or now, whether it was in the original history or this life, nothing had changed. Perhaps it was because of her dazzling moments that she had earned such an exaggerated amount of popularity among the players. Amalran had already retracted his storm elements, because if more elements floated outside his body, it would be no different from giving support to the enemy. Unfortunately, he was a bit late. Even without knowing much, just by looking at the size of the elemental domain surrounding Queen Sylvanas and Amalran in the magic mirror, one could judge the difference in their strength. Although Queen Sylvanas' strength had increased qualitatively, in terms of quantity, Amalran still had the upper hand. Now, the ratio of the black thunder and wind and the grayish-white tornado in the field of view was 3-7. Queen Sylvanas had just stepped into the realm of gods, and she was greedy for all the wind elements that could be converted into her power. She, who had not fired a single arrow since the start of the battle, turned the tables, and starlight flashed on Solidar stars of fury. Every time it flashed, it was like a vacuum arrow suddenly traversing the entire sky and landing in those seemingly nonsensical places. Only Duque exclaimed, "Beautiful." Duque, why did you say that second sister did a beautiful job?" Sasha directly sent a magic message to Duque. Normal people can't see it, but if your elemental senses are strong enough, you can see that those are Amalran's wind elemental control nodes. Duque smiled and replied, "Destroying the other party's control points means that the other party can release the elements they control, and then both parties can fight again to determine the ownership." It was unrealistic to bring all the elements in the airspace under one's control. After all, the purest elements that were like arms would always only be a small handful. The most standard way for an elemental controller to control the elemental energy in a wide area was to use a single point to control the elemental energy in a spherical area, then connect all the points into lines, and then the lines into a structure like a tree's roots, finally controlling the direction of all the branches on the main trunk. What Sylvanas was doing now was to cut off the other party's roots so that he could more fairly snatch the elemental energy from the wind elemental realm. "Mortal, you're not bad. You're really not bad. But what about this?" Amalran raised his arms high, and the titan runes on his body, shoulders, and thighs all shone with a dazzling light. The next moment, countless lightning chains shot out from the tips of his 10 fingers. Obviously, when the elemental nodes could not be hidden, this guardian of storm directly used the method of strengthening them to deal with Sylvanas's attacks one by one. Chapter 1571. As long as Sylvanas' vacuum arrow hit Amalran's elemental node, it would produce a great suction force and destroy the structure of the wind elemental energy there. However, this storm giant had directly used chain lightning to strengthen it, which meant that these nodes were directly under his control, and there was no possibility of them collapsing. But at this moment, Queen Sylvanas laughed instead of being angry. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he was looking at a female fox with the surname Proudmoore. The arrows of Solidar Wrath of the Stars were infinite. As long as the user still had spiritual power to pour in, it could infinitely gather the light of the stars, forming arrows that could be shot out like lightning. Queen Sylvanas seemed to have increased the number of vacuum arrows in a fit of pique, but only Duque could sense that each vacuum arrow was only strong on the outside. The previous vacuum arrows maintained the shape of the arrow until they hit the target, then suddenly formed a small whirlpool like a black hole, sucking in the surrounding air to achieve the goal of destroying the node. The current vacuum arrow had already lost its shape halfway through, and began to suck in the surrounding air. The spiritual power that was poured into it was completely incomparable to the first batch of vacuum arrows. Unfortunately, the strength of the giants was never their perception. The Titans had bestowed the giant guardians with surging elemental power and a powerful body that surpassed most creatures in the world, but they no longer had the luxury to bestow them with superior perception and adaptability. Amalran didn't even notice Sylvanas's small movements on the huge gauntlet on Solidar. Until he poured another wave of even stronger lightning power into his 10 fingers and poured it out. Queen Sylvanas slowly got into a posture of knocking an arrow. This time, it was not the kind of quick bowstring, and the string that extended out of the bow was no longer blurred starlight. Wind as a bowstring. Lightning as an arrow. It looked like it was stirring up nothingness, but in reality, it was stirring up a level 12 wind. The wind surged violently, and finally converged into a thread. It was clearly an invisible stream of wind, but it was countless times tougher than steel wire. As the streamlined muscles on Queen Sylvanas' arms gently swelled, the void actually produced a sound similar to playing a zither. Only then did Amaran realize his mistake. His power was too scattered. It was true that Queen Sylvanas' total amount of wind elemental energy was inferior to his, but at this moment, Queen Sylvanas' power was condensed, and the quality of her lightning energy far surpassed his. The bowstring vibrated. The lightning arrow, which was supposed to be loud and powerful, was shot without a sound. That was even more terrifying. A bolt of lightning flashed across the void. Even the guardian of the storm Amaran, who had the title of Thunder, had a huge hole in his left palm from this attack. Almost in the blink of an eye, everyone could feel the decline of the Tempest Giant's aura. Congratulations, you've won. Blood Elf Sylvanas Windrunner. Unexpectedly, Amalran, who was clasping his hands, didn't show any signs of fighting to the bitter end. The battle between you and me is over. However, the battle between us guardians and the one who is truly trying to dominate this treasury hasn't ended yet. Amalran's words made Queen Sylvanas feel a little confused. As the winner, you can get what you want. This guardian of the storm was very straightforward, and directly used his uninjured right hand to tap on the Titan rune on his shoulder. Immediately, the Titan rune that seemed to have lost the word big floated down from the sky, and slowly came before Queen Sylvanas. This is the mark of a supreme being in the pantheon. Accept it. It also means that you have accepted the mission of protecting Azeroth. This and the planets will accepting you are two completely different things. If this is what you need, then it is yours. This time, the usually decisive Queen Sylvanas hesitated. She pursued power and strength, and didn't mind sacrificing her power for the people she loved, for this beautiful planet. However, the mark of the Titans in the Pantheon. If she accepted it and became a servant of the Titans, and did things against her will, what would she do? She almost instinctively turned around and looked into the void. She knew that Duque was definitely watching this scene. Her poor knowledge of the universe wasn't enough for her to make a judgment, so she could only ask her lover for help. Duque's voice came right into her ears, accept it. But when you make the oath, use the name, Titan of all living beings of the Pantheon. Titans were Titans, why did they have to add the word all living beings? Weren't all living beings just living beings? Wouldn't that mean that any living Titan could order her around? Queen Sylvanas hesitated. Trust me. Duque emphasized. All right. I trust you. Since Duque didn't explain, Queen Sylvanas didn't ask. After spending so many years together, Sylvanas was sure that there was a deeper reason behind what Duque believed in and swore to keep a secret. This unconditional trust made her touch the Titan rune, which was even larger than a table, with both of her hands. A huge amount of knowledge on using the wind element surged into her sea of consciousness like a tidal wave. She didn't notice that the remaining Titan runes on Amalran's body started to dim one by one. In just a few breaths, they were almost devoid of light. At the same time, the rock guardian Archivon suddenly stopped his attacks. What's wrong? Magni asked, panting. Finally. I'm the only one left. Was that sorrow? Was that a sigh? Or was it the sadness of fate? That indescribable feeling caused Magni's fighting spirit to subside. The two giants, one tall and one short, looked at each other. Can you feel it? Magni Bronzebeard, the guardian of the rock and the earth. The earth bears all things, but it can't stop everything that happens on the earth. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, watching all things prosper and watch all things wither. The cycle repeats itself, but it can't change anything. This feeling, this understanding, do you have it? Archivon said in a low voice. Magni used the flaming devil's hammer to hit the giant tower shield he had formed with the earth element, and it let out a strange buzzing sound that had nothing to do with the earth element. He said in a clear voice, "The earth should be watching. But if the earth shatters, all things will cease to exist. Rather than watch helplessly and hopelessly, why not let the burning legion know what the fury of the earth is?" After saying that, Magni's eyes turned red. This made Duque's heart skip a beat. This seemed to be even more skewed in fate. No matter how he looked at it, that damned dwarf king had walked on a path of power that was different from history. Chapter 1572. What happened to the earth element specialization? Seeing this scene, Duque felt as if he had fallen from the sky. Yet, Duque, who was the disintegrator of the original works of history, was the one who had turned Azeroth's history upside down. He had no right to say anything. He could only bless Magni in his heart. As long as you're happy. The giant-like Magni leaped high into the air. A 6-story-tall dwarf performing a jumping slash was quite a shocking sight to behold. That was an unmistakably earth-shattering event. Even with Archivon's thick skin and thick flesh, he didn't dare to receive this attack. He leaped back, moving over 20 meters in a flash. But Magni still didn't let him off, and slammed his hammer onto the floor of the hall. Crack! The ground was collapsing, and a tremor akin to the movement of the earth's crust spread out. After a short period of shaking, a small volcano appeared in the center of the hall. Scorching lava splattered in all directions, the highest reaching a height of 100 meters. Archivon couldn't dodge in time, and was hit. Arg! The dwarf's lava clearly had some special power added. Caught off guard, Archivon was plastered all over his face, and he cried out in pain. Magni didn't let him off easily. He swung the house-sized Balrog hammer and smashed it at Archivon with all his might. Bam! With a horizontal sweep, Archivon's helmet was smashed. Bam! With a vertical chop, Archivon's head caved in. If he was a normal human, Archivon would have been as dead as a doornail. But as a special existence that was half life and half elemental, this kind of injury wasn't fatal. Archivon's giant palm, which could send a small fort flying with a single slap, swept Magni, who had a stable footing, over. He couldn't see with his eyes, but he could sense all objects on the ground. He leaped onto Magni's body, riding on Magni's thick bucket-like waist, raised his 2 large fists, and smashed them down on Magni's head. Against such a suppressive attack, the most standard way to retaliate was to use a kick to the opponent's back, and send him flying. Unfortunately, dwarves had short legs. Even though he had become a giant, the proportions of his body remained the same. This meant that Magni was unable to defeat his enemy with this move. Not fighting back wasn't the dwarf's style. Magni did something very shocking. He actually transferred the elements and power of the Balrog magic hammer away, and then used both his hands to block Alcon's arms, returning a hammer blow to Alcon. That's right. It was the F*King headbutt. The blazing Balrog's fire was like a shining red helmet on Magni's head. As the owner of the Flaming Devil Hammer, he did not need to worry about being injured by the flames of the Flaming Devil Hammer. Let's see whose head is harder. Magni shouted with his thick red neck. Archivon really wanted to say, "You're F*King cheating." Headbutting had always been a way to kill 10,000 enemies while sacrificing 8,000 oneself. It all depended on whose head was harder and whose head was the so-called soft shell. But now, Magni's headbutt was pressing down on the other party's skull. Even though Archivon's essence was an earth elemental, having such high purity flames and lava flowing freely on his head was extremely painful. This time, he no longer wanted to suppress Magni. He wanted to leave, but it was Magni's turn to hold him tightly and headbutt again and again. Every collision had the feeling of a collapsing mountain. But the characteristics of the Balrog magic hammer allowed Magni to have the upper hand in this exchange. Come on. This is fun. Let's hurt each other. The Shorty King shouted wildly. This scene made Duque and the other big shots of the Alliance hold their foreheads and sigh. F***CK. What happened to the battle that represented the highest level of Azeroth? A guardian with a demigod's body, and a peerless expert who was trying to break through to demigod. The two of them fighting was no different from a street brawl. Are you F***King kidding me? This time, even Duque turned off the magic mirror. He did not want to watch anymore. The outcome has been decided. Standing in the middle of the passageway in the treasure vault, Duque waited for Sylvanas to arrive. Queen Sylvanas had finally crossed the most difficult boundary between a mortal and a deity. The next step was simple accumulation of power. Congratulations. Duque opened his arms, looking like he was asking for a hug. To be honest, Duque was still a little uneasy up until this moment. A mortal becoming a deity was something to be celebrated, but the sea of divine power and elements entering one's body would also impact one's soul. Duque had read many novels before he transmigrated that humans could easily lose themselves in such situations, becoming more like a deity than a human. When a deity weighed everything on a scale and weighed the gains and losses before acting accordingly, would such a deity or demigod, just as Duque's thoughts were running wild, Queen Sylvanas had already pounced on him, her fragrant red lips pressing against his. Sylvanas always gave him a sense of independence. He had his own thoughts and his own principles of action. Most of the time, she would give up her private time for her compatriots and to govern the country. She was great, but obviously, she would not be a good partner. At this moment, she was like a little wife who had finally found her way home after going through hardships, throwing herself into the arms of her lover. I'm sorry for making you worry because of my stubbornness. Exhausted, she showed an apologetic smile. It's good that you're back. Duque stroked Queen Sylvanas' hair. He noticed that her hair color had changed from brilliant pure gold to pale platinum. Are there any changes or effects? Kiss me again, and you'll know. Duque was happy to do it, but in the end, woo woo woo. Duque's tongue was numb. What the hell? Queen Sylvanas' tongue was electrified. Seeing Duque's embarrassment, Queen Sylvanas giggled. Her gorgeous smile made her look like a mischievous little demon on Halloween. Duque, I can't learn to be gentle and virtuous even in my next life. I am who I am. Queen Sylvanas had thought that Duque would be a little annoyed. Unexpectedly, Duque's smile became even more gentle, and there was a hint of fascination in it. Yes. You are who you are, the one and only Sylvanas Windrunner of Azeroth. After waiting for a while, Magni's side was also done. Magni, who had returned to his normal form, was that short man who was 1.5 meters tall again. Although his face was bruised and swollen, he still held his head high and looked very arrogant. It was as if the one who had broken through the mortal boundary wasn't Queen Sylvanas, but him. Magni said in a gruff voice, Hey! Duque, the 4 guardians have been defeated. What about the treasury? I don't care about their so-called treasures over the years. I don't care who takes the treasures. I at least want to know what the treasures in this treasury are. Chapter 1573. That's right. What was the treasure? The so-called treasures in the original Alkavon's treasure vault were the godly equipment dropped by the Guardians. As long as a player was determined to fight in the arena, they would be excited to see these pieces of equipment. In reality, the items dropped by the 4 Guardians weren't very useful. Duque could say that the treasure vault itself was a trial given by the 4 Guardians to the challengers. This was definitely true. Different people would have different comprehension and encounters. Didn't you see Sylvanas becoming a demigod in one leap? However, there were always greedy and curious factors in human nature. Of course, this had its flaws, but it was precisely these 2 factors that promoted the progress of society and civilization. Following Duque, the big shots of the Alliance were used to getting rich. Insignificant epic-grade equipment could no longer enter their eyes. They pursued a higher level, and similarly pursued more things that could prove their glory. Duque smiled mysteriously. Do you want to know? You can look, but as for what it is, please think about it yourself. I can only say that your efforts today will not be in vain. As soon as he finished speaking, a huge wave of arcane elements surged from Duque's body. It was as if the radiance of the stars in the sky was flickering on his body. Looking closely, one would realize that all the flickering lights were actually mysterious arcane runes. Some of the runes even gave Queen Sylvanas and Magni a strange sense of familiarity. Countless flashing runes flew over, and under Duque's will, they turned into rings of light. They formed concentric circles with Duque at the center, and then spread out in all directions of the treasure vault. In just a few seconds, the few who had successfully defeated the Guardians and returned victoriously discovered that the 4 Guardians had actually revived. Onyxia wanted to transform on the spot and beat someone up. Wait. Vashti pulled her back. This time, not only did the Black Dragon Princess notice, but the others also realized that the Guardians walking over from the 4 directions of the treasure vault's passageway were completely silent. These 8-story giants couldn't be as silent as cats when they stepped on the ground. The only explanation was that the 4 of them were perfectly welcoming, or that they didn't exist in the same spatial dimension as Duque. The Rock Warden Alcafen spoke. Guardian of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. Your strength and wisdom are very great. It is no exaggeration to say that you are the wisest and most powerful existence I have seen in the past 25,000 years. Duque didn't act arrogant. He bowed slightly towards Alcafen to express his respect. How did you find out that we didn't die? Our bodies have indeed completely disappeared from this world. As soon as Duque leaned on a tiche, the 3 crows circled above Duque's head and let out unpleasant caws. It seemed strange, but the appearance of the 3 crows firmly attracted the attention of all the guards. At this time, Duque said in a clear voice, I am a person who does good. I am a person who destroys all evil in Azeroth. My power originates from the endless starry sky and the countless overlapping spaces. My eyes have already transcended time and space. Alcafen sighed. You are indeed very powerful. But for us, a duty is a duty, and there is no room for compromise. We don't have what you want. No, you do. Duque insisted. But, Duque raised his empty right palm. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. The development of the situation has long exceeded your expectations. I just want to negotiate with you once, in the name of the Titans of the Pantheon. At this point, Alcafen and the other 3 giant guards immediately became serious. Suddenly, Alcafen spoke again. He didn't speak any of the languages that were currently popular in the world of Azeroth. That was the Pantheon's language, also known as the Titan language. If Duque couldn't make contact, then he wouldn't even have the qualifications to negotiate with the 4 great guards. Who knew that not only did Duque speak the Titan language, but he also seemed to have done something that made the 4 great guards feel deep veneration. The 4 of them seemed to have quickly reached a consensus. They nodded at each other, and then bowed to Duque. The 4 of them, 8 stories tall, bowed at the same time. That aura was rather terrifying. It felt as if 4 tall buildings had collapsed at the same time. If one was standing on a grassland where the sun shone brightly, perhaps it would be as if God had turned off the lights, and the entire sky would instantly turn pitch black. Then, the 4 great guards' figures disappeared from the treasury at the same time. Along with them, the originally incomparably dense aura of the 4 great elements in the treasury disappeared. Seeing this huge palace suddenly turn from the mysterious Titan's treasury into an ordinary historical site, everyone's hearts suddenly became empty. Duque, what did you do just now? Did you subdue these 4 big fellows? Magni was itching to do so, and directly asked Duque. Subdue? Duque seemed to be surprised by this word, and then his expression became even more mysterious. The guards that the Titans created are rather perfect existences. Not only do they have their own will, but they are also very determined. If there are no accidents, they will unswervingly fulfill their guardian duties until they are destroyed. Just think about the dragon's slumber shrine. Everyone immediately understood. If not for the 5 great dragon aspects guarding Azeroth's planet protection array, this beautiful world would have long been turned into ashes by the burning legion's flaming iron hooves. As for the so-called accidents, everyone understood that the best example was Nesario. He had turned from a good dragon aspect to a powerful and crazy villain. Was Duque hinting at something by saying this now? Magni didn't care about this. Hey! Where are the treasures in the treasury? You haven't answered my question since the beginning. Duque deliberately kept them in suspense. You will know soon enough. If you are unlucky, perhaps Alcavan will kill his way to the Iron Furnace Castle and destroy your nest. He dares? Magni blew his beard and glared. If I can beat him up once, I can beat him up a second time, a third time, countless times. He. Faced with Magni's questioning and Queen Sylvani's indirect questioning, Duque refused to say anything. This made the 4 fellows who had just participated in the challenge so angry that their teeth itched. After coming out of the treasury, other than Queen Sylvani running off to show off, oh, no, the whole nation celebrating Queen Sylvani's entry into the Divine Realm, the expedition to the northern continent had entered a steady state. The Western Front was under Magni's control again, while the Eastern Front was under William's command. The Alliance's 200,000 troops gathered at Utgard Castle and began to besiege King Vraiku and his subordinates. Chapter 1574. In the northern region of Northrend, most of the areas were extremely cold. Duque did not know how the Silver Northern Expedition was organized in history. He only knew that even though he had made so many preparations for the conquest of Northrend, there were still all kinds of ridiculous situations. However, there were many soldiers in the Alliance who knew their soldiers well. An old dwarf lectured the new recruits, "Let me tell you, the commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, is the commander who knows his soldiers the best. If it was in the past, you could only wear broken leather boots. When your toes froze black, your toes would be dead and useless. Now, you have imported animal hides from the tribe and cotton boots to protect your feet. Cotton boots, cotton-padded jackets, spiked shoes, snow tracks, military rations, and hot soup that could be heated by pulling a wire. Duque even strictly ordered that the toilets must be connected to the barracks. If the soldiers left the barracks to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, even if the toilet was only 5 meters away, they might freeze to death due to the snowstorm. All these details reflected the meticulous preparations that the Alliance had made for this northern expedition. Usually, after sleeping in such a world of ice and snow, even if there were tents, there might be many soldiers who would never wake up the next morning. They did not die on the battlefield, but in an unknown place, which was quite a blow to the morale. But since the simple hot beds and the new mobile central heating system were invented, the non-battle losses of soldiers camping in the wild had basically dropped to single digits. William led the Alliance army to attack the Howling Fjord, and in history, less than 10,000 people could kill their way to Utgard Castle. It was not that the Alliance and the Horde did not want to invest more troops, but that the logistics could not keep up. Now, it was completely different. The flying fortress Naxxramas opened the way, and the Alliance forcefully landed on the shoals on the east and west sides. Then, huge conveyor tracks were set up on the shoals, and the diesel engine drove the tracks to transport boxes of military supplies to the plateau of the Howling Fjord, which was tens of meters high. Soldiers, heavy tanks, and other military equipment were transported back and forth by large elevators. Looking at a group of soldiers using a fire that had been prepared in advance to burn the lower part of the diesel engine, William felt a sense of extravagance. He smiled bitterly. Could it be that Uncle Duque really has the ability to predict the future? Once upon a time, Valera would always play the role of cheering William on and encouraging him, saying that he could surpass Duque. However, after spending so much time together, Valera could no longer say it. Perhaps. The Alliance had only popularized diesel engines in the past few years. Steam engines could not operate in extremely cold weather, but they had been tested. But it was hard to estimate how good a diesel engine would be in a damned place like No Scent. After all, there were not many extremely cold regions in the Eastern Kingdom. Even the snow-covered Loch Moden and the former Alterac only had a temperature of a few degrees below zero. There wasn't a single military consultant or staff officer who suggested how to start a diesel engine that was completely frozen by frost in a temperature of -40 degrees Celsius. When the problem arose, most of the Alliance army was in despair. If the Alliance's technological products were excluded, it meant that they could only rely on the most primitive infantry and the Griffin Knights to fight. If that continued, the Alliance would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Who knew that in less than 2 minutes, Duque would reply and ask them to set up a stove under the engine to roast it? It sounded ridiculous, but during World War II on Earth, both the Soviet army and the German army did this in extremely cold weather. Otherwise, even if the soldiers used hammers to smash the ice on the outside, the inside would still be frozen into a lump of ice and would not be able to move at all. If they wanted to roast it, to what extent? He replied, "The ice has melted, and the outer armor has started to turn black. Leave the rest to the antifreeze oil." It was a simple, violent, and meaningful solution, and it was settled just like that. However, everyone knew that Duque had never been in the snow for the first half of his life. Something that even the dwarves couldn't do was solved by him. Not only did he use the stove to deal with the frozen machine, but he also used the antifreeze oil. The dwarves had to go through thousands of experiments before they could come up with a better formula. However, Duque had already given them the formula for the results, so he just King did it. Black technology was thrown out one after another, making the gnome and dwarf inventors dizzy. Gerben complained more than once that Duque's actions would make their scientists useless. Duque shrugged. "The Burning Legion will make a comeback in less than 10 years. I can't do anything about it. Why don't you let the Burning Legion be late, and I'll give your scientists more time to practice." Gerben was speechless. With such powerful modern equipment, the armies on both the east and west practically advanced while laying railways. With an irresistible momentum, it only took a little more than a week for them to converge under Utgard Castle. The East Army directly set up heavy cannons across the Imolen waterfall on the east side of the castle, while the main force led by William on the West Army set up the cannons and lined up the Orc Infantry Legion led by young Salufar. This was not only making the best use of everything, but also a form of deterrence. The bombardment of the 155mm heavy cannons only took a few minutes to leave the stronghold of the Vrykul King Imolen riddled with holes. In the eyes of the Alliance's cannons, a castle that had not been reinforced by magical protection arrays was just a large target. The city that the Vrykul had spent a whole 10 centuries to build was destroyed by the cannons of the Alliance in a few minutes. "Air Defense Unit, get ready." William raised his 2 swords, Ceremony, which was a combination of the Shadow Ripper, Sheritol, and the Shadow Plunderer, Aramine, high up. As expected, the Vrykul, who had half-giant bloodlines and huge bodies, continuously poured out from behind the destroyed high walls of the castle. They spread their legs and swarmed towards the allied forces of the Alliance and the horde in a messy formation. The Vrykul were loyal to their king Imolen. Although the orcs always said that they were a race born to fight, compared to the Vrykul, it seemed that the Vrykul were more worthy of this title. If they were just the giant Vrykul, it would not be enough for the Alliance to pay so much attention to them. The real name of the Vrykul was the Dragon Raider clan. Among the most commonly seen progenitor dragons, these beasts were different from their relatives of the 5-colored Guardian Dragon clan, who had been bestowed some power and high intelligence by the Titans. The progenitor dragons did not have a magical physique, and their intelligence was slightly lower. Strictly speaking, they were standard dragon beasts. They did not have the long necks of their distant relatives of the Guardian Dragon clan, and their tails were shorter. However, the proportion of their head was larger, and their strong jaws made up more than 40% of their head. The wings were very powerful, but the front legs were almost completely degenerated. When not flying, the wings played the main role of supporting the body. The hind legs were thick and strong, and were the main tool for hunting. Compared to the Guardian Dragon clan, their entire body was more streamlined and suitable for flight. Chapter 1575. In any case, the Vricuans had already trained these terrifying progenitor dragons as mounts. These draconic knights were the biggest problem for the Allied forces. If they didn't get rid of these guys and charged straight to the Ice-Crown Glacier, no one knew what would happen to the Allied forces' supply line. Seeing the swarm of progenitor dragons that looked like a swarm of locusts and dark clouds rising in the sky, almost every Alliance commander revealed a triumphant smile. Let's show these barbarians of the northern region what a trap is. William's ceremony slashed down heavily from the sky. In the sky, Naxxramas didn't even need to open fire. Even the Alliance's airships that were swaying in the air opened all their cannons and fired the 40mm 8-barreled cannons. There were also the new Dongfeng air defense cannons on the ground. In the sky and on the ground, not even 3-style bombs were used. They directly formed a dead zone that could turn the entire airspace into an absolute no-fly zone. It was the black smoke and light projectiles that were pulled out from thousands of air defense cannons at different angles. Amidst the sounds that were denser than the sound of the rain, young Salufar only saw the sky full of red progenitor dragons being shot into pieces of smelly flesh and blood. Even their masters who were riding them exploded in the air. They didn't even have the chance to fly away from Utgard Castle before they turned into bloody mud and fell back onto the castle. This was the biggest blow to their morale. The Vricuans' morale was declining at a speed that was almost visible to the naked eye. They were already on the verge of collapse from the bombardment of the heavy cannons before they even engaged in battle. Now, the progenitor dragon legion that they were most proud of had been annihilated. Even the Vricuan infantry that had already begun to charge had begun to slow down. The earth-shattering shouts from 15 minutes ago were now like the futile cries of 2 or 3 kittens. No one knew if it was to hide the fear in their hearts or if they were truly braver than others. William also felt a little bored. He propped his sword on the ground and only said 4 words, "Su Jin, fire." Under the influence of a certain someone, William became a commander of the new era. He had the qualities of a modern military commander on Earth, and he also had powerful combat skills and swordsmanship. He could be said to be the model of a new era leader. Facing the primitive Vricuans, he didn't hold back. He directly used heavy artillery and mortar formations to blow up the Vrykul who dared to rush out. Any infantrymen who managed to escape the bombardment zone or dragon knights who managed to fly out of the no-fly zone were naturally killed by snipers. William gazed at the dilapidated Utgard Castle with a faint smile on his face. Uncle Duque really takes care of Stormwind. Yeah. Brawl Bearmantle of the Iron Triangle also sighed. As the commander-in-chief, Duque's forte was this kind of seeming fairness, but there was no trace of favoritism. Putting the dwarves on the western front meant that the dwarves couldn't be the main force on the eastern front. The small Vrykul raider clan was definitely not worthy of William's full strength. What Duque and William really valued were the eggs of the ancestor dragons. Adult dragons had their own will. They were used to being commanded by the Vrykul, so it was impossible for them to listen to humans. Dragon eggs were different. The ancestor dragons were typical wild beasts. They wouldn't be like the chromatic dragons, even if they already had their own senses and consciousness in the dragon eggs. As long as they could seize the dragon eggs, Stormwind would be able to nurture an army of its own dragon knights in time. It wasn't that the current griffins weren't useful. Although griffins were easier to tame, their combat power was still inferior to that of the dragon race. This had been proven through countless battles. Secondly, the Wildhammer dwarves were the best at taming griffins in the Alliance. It could be said that the Wildhammer dwarves had the best griffin population in their hands. If Stormwind wanted to further develop its own air force, it would be necessary to have an exclusive aerial race. The Night Elves had hippogriffs, the Blood Elves had draconic hawks, the dwarves and pygmies had griffins, and the humans had ancestor dragons. Anyway, as long as they didn't directly control a large number of chromatic dragons, the Dragon Sleep Shrine wouldn't have any objections. It's a pity that the Kiraji insect people aren't used to cold areas. William muttered to himself. William, don't be greedy. Besides, those insects aren't directly under Stormwind. Valilla's words made William laugh. The following battle could be said to be daunting, but not dangerous. When the Vrykhal's forces that could be used for a counterattack had been wiped out, it was time for the most orthodox siege battle. After smashing all the arrow towers and other things on the periphery, heavy cannons were never able to blast a towering fortress into the ground in the truest sense of the word. When a large amount of rubble was laid on top of the ruins, the cannons would also become ineffective. Cannons also cost money. In order to contribute to the remnants of the castle buried under the rubble, they had no choice but to send in the infantry. Young Salufar's Blackrock Orc army came in handy at this time. With a continuous chant of Loktar, Ogre, the Vrykhal were overturned. The Vrykhal were slightly taller than the strongest orc, about 3 meters tall. Their strength was comparable to the orcs, but their agility was a notch lower. Their movements were sluggish and clumsy. What determined victory or defeat was the weapon. The Alliance's mass-produced fine steel weapons and multi-layer composite plate armor gave the orcs greater destructive power and better survivability. In fact, the concept of composite plate armor was also proposed by Duque. Considering the decreasing lethality of sharp weapons in close combat, as well as the larger enemies they would face in the future. With the physique of a human, being smashed by a 2.5-meter-tall orc with all its might was the same as being smashed by a 3-meter-tall giant with one blow. Therefore, Duque proposed the concept of composite plate armor. Its principle was similar to the reactive armor of the American main battle tank M1A1 in the last century. Its interlayer material provided better penetration resistance. Of course, a single soldier wouldn't be able to use something as high-end as reactive armor. What Duque developed was to change the original one layer of stamped plate armor into 2 layers of the same thickness. It was just that a large number of fixed small springs were installed in the 2 layers of plate armor, and then filled with a large amount of cotton to balance defense and warmth. This was because iron could make the human body lose heat faster. After repeated tests, the composite plate armor could greatly increase the survival rate of soldiers by more than 50% against attacks from heavy weapons such as hammers and sticks. The frontline soldiers all said it was good after using it. Of course, on the surface, Duque wouldn't favor one over the other. Even young Salufar's troops who came to work were equipped with the composite plate armor of the orcs. He said that after this battle, the orcs could take the plate armor with them when they returned. Duque's generosity deeply moved a simple and valiant general like young Salufar. Unfortunately, Duque wasn't a green-faced, fanged orc. Otherwise, young Salufar might have knelt down and willingly become his lackey. Chapter 1576. The gap in strength between the Alliance and the Horde had widened to such an extent that there was no need for any tricks. The primitive industrial strength of the Horde meant that even if Salufar took away the composite plate armor, he would not be able to replicate it. To make the plate armor from thick to thin without losing its original strength and toughness, this itself required better steel casting technology. That was a technology that even the goblins could not master, let alone the Horde. Even if the Rustwater conglomerate mastered this technology, it was another matter whether they would be willing to work for the Horde and create composite plate armor to meet the needs of millions of infantry. Even if the Horde could mass-produce it, it was time for the new generation of alloy armor to appear. Duque was full of stuff. If he wanted to get rid of the Horde, he could definitely make it so that the taillights of the Horde's car could not be seen. In the Battle of Utgard, Prince Karaseth of the Vrykhal was killed by Salufar Jr. Ingvar. The plunderer guarding the center of the castle, was killed by Gavin Rad. Godik Ashentai, the living statue of the ice mammoth who was resurrected by necromancy, was killed by Tyrion Fordring. A long time ago, because the Vrykhal protected the ancestors of the humans, they were hunted by the cruel Skadi. The Vrykhal would name a person after a characteristic. Since it was cruel, one could imagine what kind of person this guy was. It was this long-lived Skadi who was personally beaten by Eiril the Hoof. As for the king of the Vrykhal, Imolan, he was naturally left to Varian. Everything seemed to be going well. If there were no problems, the Alliance was likely to follow the plan and fight all the way north, taking care of Grizzly Hills and Zidak. But there were 9 out of 10 things in the world that did not go one's way. Duque had planned so much and prepared so well, but he still encountered a lot of F** king things. A seemingly insignificant event, and an out-and-out major event, happened almost at the same time. Khadgar sent a message. The Titan guardian of Azeroth, Loken, the King of Wisdom, has sent an important message. He hopes that Master can personally go over. Alexstrasza suddenly sent a message in exasperation. That idiot Malygos has attacked the Ice-Crown Glacier. Duque was so angry that he said, F***CK, at the highest level of Karazhan more than 10 times in a row. The people around Duque rarely saw Duque lose his composure like this. In their eyes, Duque was always so confident, as if he was the god of fate who controlled fate. Vashj, who was starting to get familiar with Duque, was also a little surprised. Fortunately, everyone knew that Duque was not the kind of person who would get angry for no reason. At this time, Duque's 3 maids did not dare to go up and persuade him. Unknowingly, everyone's gazes turned to Aurelia, Duque's first and most intimate partner. Duque, what happened? Aurelia walked over slowly. Although her stomach was slightly bulging, she still looked elegant and charming. Duque raised his head on the chair and held his forehead with his hand. There was a clear sense of frustration in his voice. No, I'm just a little disappointed. There were some things that I knew would happen, and I did my very best to avoid them, but I still couldn't stop them from seeking death. This makes me feel a sense of powerlessness. Aurelia walked behind Duque and stretched out a pair of white jade-like arms from the back of the chair to gently massage Duque's temples. Don't blame yourself too much. You're a mere demigod, not a guardian appointed by the Titans, and definitely not the Titans themselves. I think even the Titans of creation, who are known to be omniscient and omnipotent, have things they can't do. Thinking of the bitter end of the pantheon, Duque could not help but smile bitterly. That's true, I'm too focused on perfection. At this time, Aurelia gave the 3 maids a look. The maids immediately understood. Vashj naturally came up to massage Duque's legs. Solarian and Vanessa's reactions were a little funny. All along, Duque did not treat them as maids, but more like adjutants. What they did was basically fight and kill in Duke's name and watch over the place. So when they came up, the situation was quite funny. The 2 of them were very stiff with their massage techniques. After a few massages, Duque raised his hand and said, all right. I'm not that delicate. If you want to enjoy yourself, wait until you kill the Burning Legion. You can leave. Aurelia can stay. Aurelia nodded, and the 3 maids quickly left. Duque gently pressed his ear against Aurelia's lower abdomen. Here, I'm stressed because I know better than anyone the terrifying situation I'll face in the future. I've been working so hard to preserve Azeroth's vitality as much as possible. But this time, I've realized that since some people can't be controlled, they'll definitely court death. So be it. I'll build a truly united and invincible army that can fight against the Burning Legion. Aurelia kissed Duque's forehead with infinite gentleness on her face. It's okay, we all know you're the best. You're the great hero of this world. Think about it, if you weren't so great, such an outstanding Windrunner, how could the 3 Windrunner sisters give themselves to you and be willing to have children with you? Thank you. Whether Duque was angry or hesitant, all negative emotions were temporary. After he sorted out his thoughts, he once again summoned the leader of the Alliance and Alexstrasza for a magic video conference. Everyone, I have bad news to tell you. Just 15 minutes ago, the Dragon Aspect, King of Magic Malygos, killed his way into the Ice-Crown Glacier in the name of revenge for his partner, Sindagosa. At the same time, the Ancient Guardian, Loken, the King of Wisdom, sent a message to discuss the Creator's Sanctuary. At this point, Duque pressed hard on the table in front of him, and his whole body leaned forward, revealing a strong aura. What I want to say is that we're facing 2 major crises at the same time. The first is the possible betrayal of the King of Magic. The second is the conspiracy of the King of Wisdom, Loken. What? Wait. The red dragon in the video was anxious. Malygos isn't going to betray us. First of all, he might not lose. Even if he loses, he won't lose his life and become a bone dragon, right? Moreover, he's very good at escaping. Magni was also a little anxious. What's going on with that Loken? The conspiracy of the ancient guardian? Duque first looked at Alexstrasza. The beautiful red dragon had a clear look of anxiety on her face. He could imagine that Nesario's betrayal back then had already broken her heart. As the big sister of the five-color dragon aspect, she would always charge at the front in every battle in order to block more firepower for her brothers and sisters. In the past, Duque had tolerated it in order to maintain a friendly relationship with the dragon's slumber shrine. When he couldn't bear it anymore, there was no need to bear it anymore. Chapter 1577. He had had enough of Malygos's stupidity, and he had had enough of playing the heartbeat game with this lunatic every now and then. Duque finally flipped the table of his mind in anger. With a sullen face, he spoke with the most solemn expression and tone. I've never been stingy with imagining the worst-case scenario with the greatest malice. Then, there are two things in front of us. Loken's problem has been confirmed. Although he hid it well, I smell a terrible smell on him, the smell of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. At the mention of Yogg-Saron, no matter who it was, their faces did not look good. None of the ancient gods were useless. They did not expect another ancient god to appear just after they killed Si-Thun. Everyone immediately thought of the problem of the planet's will. 25,000 years ago, because they found that the ancient gods and astral souls were too deeply entangled, eliminating a few ancient gods at once would only kill astral souls. That was why the titans of the pantheon let them go and sealed them instead. 25,000 years had passed, and Azeroth astral souls had gradually grown and begun to have their own will. That was why Duque communicated with the planets Will on Kiraj and joined forces with the Sleeping Dragon Temple and Elun to completely kill Si-Thun. Astral soul's current condition? Kalia asked. Duque shook his head. Last time was equivalent to humans cutting off their own flesh to heal. Although the abscesses were removed, the wounds would eventually heal, but not so quickly. Astral souls only survived the most dangerous period. Let's talk about Yogg-Saron first, the Red Dragon Queen said. Of course, Duque knew what she was thinking. If Yogg-Saron's situation was more serious, as a dragon aspect, she had a reason to deal with the ancient gods first, and then deal with Malygos. Duque did not refuse. He told her the history he knew. Loken was the ancient god watcher created by the Titans in Azeroth, the external guardian of Odor. Other than the Pentashade dragons, there were also 8 Titan guardians who were of the same status as the Titans. Loken was one of the Titan guardians. He represented wisdom. There were also Storm, Winter, Life, Order, and Invention, the 5 Titan Guardians, Odin, Great Guardian Laden, and the Creator's Engine Guardian. Located in the northern part of Noscent, east of the Ice-Crown Glacier, Otter was the largest of the 3 laboratories built by Titan on Azeroth. The goal was to develop a perfect creature, and the evolution of a creature required time. Since the Titans wouldn't stay on the same planet for too long, they would visit and observe from time to confirm their progress. There were also many assistants and servants to help manage the laboratory. These were all created by Titan himself. When the Titans visited for the second time, they discovered that the laboratory had been invaded by the ancient gods and that the entire planet was under their rule. After fighting with these stubborn enemies, they discovered that because they had deeply infected the laboratory, they couldn't be completely wiped out. As such, they decided to seal them away in the depths of Azeroth. The one who infected Odor the most was Yogg-Saron, and he was also sealed here. The entire laboratory was sealed. The name Yogg-Saron was first mentioned in the Grizzly Hills, where there was a withered world tree, Vajrasil. If one had a good relationship with the bear monsters, they would tell adventurers that in ancient times, the Night Elven Druids planted this world tree, but because the roots were too deep, they even reached the lair of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. The dark power of the ancient god began to leak, and the Night Elven Druids were afraid that Vajrasil would cause a huge disaster, so they destroyed the world tree. Later, some of the nearby bear monsters began to replant Vajrasil, which had been broken into 3 pieces, and planned to resurrect Ushik, the great bear god who had died in the ancient war. In the end, Ushak was resurrected by the bear monsters, but he was already contaminated by the ancient god. With the help of adventurers, some of the bear monsters finally used the purified dust of Vadrasil to purify Ushak. After introducing this terrible history of contamination, Duque concluded, now everyone has an idea of Yogg-Saron's ability to contaminate, right? Loken is not the head of the Titan Guardians set up by the Pantheon in Azeroth. I received news that Odin, the manager of Oder, has gone into self-exile. The other Guardians are not in normal condition, and I found the scent of Yogg-Saron in the video communication sent by the other party. At this point, Duque pressed his hands heavily on the table. I can be absolutely sure that Loken, the King of Wisdom, has fallen into madness. He has been corrupted by the ancient god, and secretly plotted to murder the other Guardians and tampered with Oder's files. Hiss. Everyone gasped. Everyone was used to the whispers and corruption of the ancient god. Previously, there had been a good dragon aspect, Nesario, who had been corrupted. Now that there was a Guardian rebellion, it was not unacceptable. Duque had peeked at Sargeras' past achievements from Mediv, so no one doubted his words. For a moment, everyone felt immense pressure. A Lich King was troublesome enough, and an ancient god had appeared at the same time. It would be a huge problem if they left it alone. Now, there was also the Blue Dragon King involved. Just as Alexstrasza was about to say something, Duque slammed the table. Alexstrasza, you don't have to persuade me. The matter of Malygos was related to my foundation in the divine domain. If I attacked Oder or Icecrown Fortress with all my strength, only to have Malygos break through my magic net in the end, that would truly be the end of me. Before the matter of Malygos is resolved, I will not step into Oder or Icecrown Glacier. As the saying went, people of the same trade were enemies. Even if Malygos, the self-proclaimed king of magic in the world of Azeroth, and Duque, who controlled the weave, claimed to be in different fields, at the end of the day, it involved the distribution of core interests, who got more elemental energy from the major elemental realms, and who got less. If one had more, the other would naturally have less. In the past, they were comrades in the same trench, and the cake was big enough that they could barely coexist peacefully. Now that no one was optimistic that Malygos would succeed in finding trouble with Arthas, there would be many variables. It was not that the Red Dragon Queen could not understand Duque's approach. She was caught in the middle, and she was not a dragon either. On one side was her brother, and on the other was her most important ally. And the power of mortals could be said to be getting stronger. It was impossible for the dragon aspect to increase its power. However, the upper limit of mortals was only at the level of astral souls. With Duque, Sylvanas, Vashj, and the Kiraji twin emperors, the power and opinions of mortals could no longer be ignored. Chapter 1578. Let's wait and see. What else could Alexstrasza do? That was all she could say. The meeting ended on a sour note. Everyone knew that there would be a result soon. Malygos, the king of magic, was never the kind of dragon that could last for long. His magic was more like a wave. When there was a huge disparity in strength, he could instantly kill his opponent. When the disparity was not big, he could hurt his opponent. He might even be able to use his dragon body to resist the enemy's counterattack and kill him. If he could not hurt his opponent, he would not be surprised. He would lose if he lost. The arrogant Malygos rushed into Arthas' lair, the Ice Crown Fortress. Arthas even opened the magic defense array above the Ice Crown Fortress for him so that the Blue Dragon King could directly come to the Ice Throne. Ordinary Calamity grades had no chance of winning against the King of Magic of the dragon race. Since resistance was meaningless, it was better to fight it out directly. Sitting on the Ice Throne, Arthas could only see two glints of blue light from the Lich King's helmet. He silently watched the icy blue behemoth slowly descend from the sky. It pounced on the shining blue wings that did not belong in this gray sky. Every time it flapped its wings, the cold air swept across the entire Ice Crown Fortress like an ice storm. The temperature, which was already cold enough, dropped even further. The absolute zero turbulence easily covered the entire area above the ice-crowned fortress with thick snow except for the ice throne. Roar! A dragon roar sounded. In the few layers near the ice throne, every undead was shocked by this primordial roar that seemed to come from the distant past. This roar came from the overlord of the planet that had been at the top of the food chain for 25,000 years, the dragon race. This dragon roar belonged to a king of magic who controlled the elements. The terrifying pressure of the two domains directly made the slightly weaker elite undead warriors feel unstable. It was as if the soul fire nestled in their decaying chest could be extinguished at any time. Descending from the clouds, Maligos did not directly land on the square at the top of the ice-crowned fortress. He flapped his dark blue wings and hovered above the ice throne. His golden eyes were like a pair of golden balls made of gold, and he looked at Arthes, who was sitting upright on the throne of ice with a kind of coldness that belonged to the ruler of the elemental world. The guy who called himself the Lich King had no intention of standing up. He still sat on the throne, which made Maligos very unhappy. However, he liked the feeling of looking down on his enemy. Despicable blasphemer Arthas. You should know why I'm here. Maligos let out a rumbling sound, and under his huge blue jaw, his white beard fluttered in the surging cold wind. Sindagosa. Arthes's voice was filled with obvious disdain. I was just worrying about the lack of air forces, and here you are. Although I don't believe in luck, it does seem to exist. Maligos' face became very interesting. Perhaps in this master dragon's imagination, even if Arthes didn't kowtow as if he had seen a god, he should be trembling. He really couldn't see any possibility of Arthes defeating him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have charged into Ice-Crown Fortress alone to find trouble with Arthes. Of course, he had absolute confidence in his own strength. At the same time, he was also here to take advantage of the situation. Winter's Embrace Lake wasn't far from his lair. With Duque as bait, the combined attack of Alexstrasza and Alun was completely within his range of perception. He was absolutely aware of how serious Arthes' injuries were. Who knew that he would be treated as an idiot who was delivering food to the other party? How could the proud Maligos not be angry? Presumptuous, accompanied by a terrifying dragon's roar, the cold wind under Maligos' dark blue wings was like clouds of ice, with specks of blue cold light in the clouds. After these scattered lights descended, the frost elements above the entire ice-crowned fortress became chaotic. The frost elements that were supposed to bow to the Lich King all worshipped and offered their loyalty to the primordial king of magic in the world of Azeroth. It felt terrible to be deprived of control of the subordinate elements. In the elemental world, Arthes's hearing should have been the sound of countless strings breaking. In practically a single exchange, the elements that Arthes could control were reduced to a pitiful area of less than 10 meters around the ice throne. The huge ice-crowned fortress had almost become Maligos' territory. His blue eyes still emitted a dim light. This time, Arthes finally stood up. Facing the smug blue dragon king, Arthes smiled. This. Perhaps it should be attributed to some kind of inorganic sound similar to laughter. It sounded hollow and strange. Maligos, you are indeed very strong. Ever since Duke Marcus set despicable traps for me again and mobilized a large number of strong people to surround me, I also feel that the quality of my subordinates is a bit lacking. You came just in time. Heh. Have you gone mad? Maligos raised his chin high, looking like he wanted to see what else he could do. Arthes held the hilt of Frostmourne with both hands and raised his head slightly. No, I just find it funny. Has my nickname changed from Lich King to King of Ice? Maligos' arrogant smile suddenly froze. If the other party was a pharaoh or someone who relied on the elements for a living, when all the other party's elements were controlled by him, the ancestor of magic, the result would be a beating. Maligos calmed down. Liches play with corpses. I'm not afraid even if Sindagosa comes out alive. There are no corpses of top experts for him to enslave. Before the Blue Dragon King's imagination could end, Arthes had already solved the mystery himself. Hee hee. Arthes let out a sound that should have been a sneer. Why would someone as great as me allow the vulgar you to come before my throne? It's to let you personally taste the 10,000 years of regret that you forged with your own hands. The Frostmourne, in his hands suddenly became as large as the sky. Although it was just a shadow, some things that were bound in the shadow of the huge rune sword almost made Malygos collapse on the spot. No. No. Don't come over, like a frightened girl, Malygos screamed and turned around to fly. However, the blue dragon's shadows behind him were faster than him. Father, your majesty, great majesty, darling. Chapter 1579. No, don't come over, Malygos flapped his wings with difficulty and continued to flee with all his might. However, no matter how fast he was, he could not overcome the resistance of the air and storm, let alone fly faster than the souls of his compatriots. In the blink of an eye, he was caught up. That's right, the ones pestering him were the blue dragons who had betrayed him in the ancient war. Despite knowing that his entire race was in a weakened state, he still mobilized his army in a fit of rage, which ultimately led to the death of all the blue dragons, his most loyal guards, his most beloved children, and his most beloved blue dragon queen, Sindagosa. It was that battle that almost wiped out the entire blue dragon race. If Krasus hadn't secretly helped Malygos hide a few blue dragon eggs during the ancient war, the blue dragon race would have been even worse off. However, this fiasco had obviously become a nightmare for Malygos that he could not get rid of for 10,000 years. He had also given up treatment because of this extremely tragic blow, and hid in a small black hole for 10,000 years. It was not until Duque helped him kill Nethario that his mental state improved a little. Who knew? The nightmare would come again. These dragons had all died on the battlefield in the ancient war, and even their remains had not been transported back to the Dragonbone Wilderness for burial. They were victims who had died outside. Unable to return to their roots, and unable to rest in peace after countless days and nights of anticipation for 10,000 years, these dragon souls had long become extremely twisted and crazy. If Malygos was still a normal dragon king, with his own characteristics as a dragon aspect and strong willpower, not to mention dealing with a group of dragon souls, he might not even be able to take Jaden's Darkness of 1,000 Souls head-on. However, what Arthas had directly released was an ultimate move that Malygos could not resist at all. If he really dared to face Sindagosa, he would have done it when Duque had reminded him to collect his wife's remains. It was precisely because of the death of his wife and children that his willpower was greatly weakened, and he became a psychopath. What was trapped by Frostmourne was, of course, the real souls of his wife and children. In the past, he did not dare to face them. Every night when he was asleep, he would wake up because of them. Now that he was facing the souls, Malygos broke down on the spot, and wanted to run away while crying. What arrogance! What glory! What dignity! All of it. Trying to run? Is this prince's throne something you can come and go as you please? Arthas let out a cold laugh. He took a step forward, and a stairway made of ice suddenly rose up at high speed. In the next instant, Arthas shot out like a cannonball, like a compressed spring. In the face of a peerless expert, this kind of attack that seemed to be a one-way trip was simply like sending food to his death. Against a dragon king who had lost his confidence and was on the verge of a mental breakdown, this was the only way for Arthas to achieve a quick victory. Vengeful spirits and disturbances could only confuse a true expert for a short moment. No matter how much Arthas saw Malygos, he had already suffered at the hands of Duque time and time again. He could only treat Malygos as his strongest enemy. He's a dragon king after all, right? As it turned out, Arthas had overestimated Malygos. He had simulated it countless times in his imagination. For example, Malygos would suddenly wake up in the chaos and use his dragon tail or other more powerful skills to counterattack. In the end, he didn't even need to use it. Frostmourne plunged deeply into the blue dragon king's chest without any suspense. Based on the feeling and the soul feedback from the runic magic sword, Arthas knew that this sword had succeeded. If the remnant souls of Sindagosa and Malygos' children had only troubled this blue dragon king on a purely spiritual level. Now, it had penetrated deep into the concept of the soul. The huge skull on Frostmourne seemed to be smiling sinisterly. Along the huge and cold evil blade, the true soul cores of Syndagosa and Malago's children were forcibly injected into the Blue Dragon King's body, entangling with their king's soul. Hee hee. Arthis laughed coldly. She pulled out her sword and descended, allowing the Blue Dragon King, who was howling in fear after being injured, to flap its wings and fly away. So, this is how it feels to be in control of the fate of a top-notch expert. This feels so good. Under the thick full helmet, the ghostly blue eyes flickered non-stop. Arthis's entire body began to fall. He had only fallen into the air when the cold wind rising from the ice throne had already caught him and slowly allowed him to descend back onto the throne. Seeing the huge blue dragon flapping its wings and flying far away, Blood Queen Lanais hurriedly approached the throne. Supreme Lich King. Arthis waved his hand. No. Let him go. We'll go inside the Gate of Divine Wrath. In less than half a day, the news that the Blue Dragon King had been severely injured by the Lich King and had to flee with serious injuries spread throughout the entire allied army. Most of the Alliance and Horde leaders were shocked. After all the previous reports said that Arthis had been tricked by Duque and had been beaten until he spat out ketchup or something. Who knew that he would cripple Malygos, one of the planet's top forces, and could only flee with his tail between his legs? Arthis's strength is on a completely different level when he's outside the Ice-Crown Glacier than when he's inside. Everyone thought in this direction. Although Alexstrasza was worried about Malygos' serious injuries, she was even more relieved that Malygos did not die in the Ice-Crown Citadel and become a bone dragon under Arthas' command, just as Duke had said. Malygos, She even tried to communicate with her brother using magic. In the image, Malygos was in a very bad state. His dragon face was clearly lacking color. Seriously injured, but still alive, this was the conclusion the Red Dragon Queen came to. Malygos only replied with one word, "Humph." Then he turned off the communication. She was not surprised. Malygos was like this, arrogant and unaccepting. She completely understood that he must be very upset after suffering such a sudden defeat. He did not want his sisters to see him embarrassed. He was already giving them face by answering her message. In her perception, Malygos did not look back and flew directly to the west of Northrend. That was where his lair towering in the sky on the island was located, the magic pivot. Alexstrasza turned to give Duque a warning. Malygos is not in a good state, but he is still a member of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. I will pretend that I did not hear what you said before. Did you communicate with him using magic? Can you send me the image of the communication? Duque asked instead. The Red Dragon Queen put her hands on her hips and frowned. She was obviously a little unhappy. I saw it with my own eyes. He was defeated, injured, and humiliated. To a dragon king, a dragon aspect, the dragon aspect. There is nothing worse than this. If you want to rub salt in the wound, then I am sorry, but this will make me hate you. What else could Duque say? He could only remain silent. Chapter 1580. They were brothers and sisters, but their bones were still connected. If Duque said too much, it would seem like he was trying to sow discord between them. Originally, Duque had a lot to say to Alexstrasza, but when the words came to his mouth, he couldn't say a word. It was just that his vigilance towards Malygos was at its peak. As he cut off the magic communication with the Red Dragon Queen, Duque sent a level 1 alert in the Alliance. Magni, it's still about Malygos. Suspend the war on the Western Front. All mobile troops retreat to the nearest large town, preferably a fortress. Move Naxxramas back to the holy city of Inkyra to cover the vanguard of the Western Front. We have to get our troops back as soon as possible. That big blue lizard, sigh. Speaking of which, aren't we afraid of provoking Alexstrasza by doing this? Magni also had a headache. Duque said firmly, I'm the commander of the Alliance. She can be emotional, but I can't. I have to be responsible for the lives of millions of soldiers. Should we inform the tribe? I'll tell Thrall now. As for what the tribe does, we don't care. Seeing Duque's expression, Magni already knew what was going on. Duque had already calculated everything. It was rare for the Warsong clan to return to a land rich in prey. It was a feast after 25 years of hardship. While the Alliance was busy conquering Northrend, the Warsong clan's vanguard station in the North Wind Tundra was more like occupying territory. Mining, hunting, slaughterhouses. Almost all the traditional tribal industries could be found near this newly built Warsong stronghold. Would they be willing to suddenly evacuate? Duque used magic communication to find Thrall. Thrall was very concerned about Duque's serious warning. What? Azeroth's aspect, the Blue Dragon King Malygos, was seriously injured by Arthas. He might go insane and rebel? Thrall was shocked. The tribe didn't get on the Dragon Slumber Temple's good side because the old tribe had enslaved the Red Dragon Queen. The tribe didn't expect to get any help from the dragons. In any case, he was an ally of an ally, so he was still his ally. Now that their relationship was passable, it was fine. Who knew that the Dragon Slumber Shrine would actually produce this brainless king? Since he couldn't beat Arthas, he might even turn around and cause trouble? Sal was stunned. There was no way Thrall would let the Draenor immigrants who had just arrived in Kalimdor go on an expedition without a firm foothold. The ones going to Northrend this time were Blackstone and Warsong of the Beastman's Cornerstone clans. Sar only left his Frostwolf clan in Kalimdor. It was precisely because Sal believed that Duque would not harm his compatriots that he sent these two clans who could fight. All along, he had been following Duque, so there was still some meat, but how much was another matter. The tribe did not contribute much, so Sal was too embarrassed to ask Duque for things. Duque was also famous for his kindness. Now that Duque said that Malygos was a trap, Thrall accepted this reality without hesitation. I will immediately inform the troops in the Northwind Taiga to evacuate. Having been with the Alliance for a long time, Thrall also realized the importance of instant communication. The tribe was not as rich as the Alliance, which normalized magic communication and assigned communication tools to squadrons. But the Warsong stronghold was still notified. Who knew that the news that came back from the Warsong clan would make Sal's heart go cold? What? Gurus arrived at the Warsong stronghold 3 days ago and pulled the main force out to hunt? Letting Gurus go was purely for the purpose of training. Sal had thought that there was no war on the Western Front, so it would be good to let Gurus go to the northern region to see the world. Who knew that this would happen soon after he was sent? Sal's face turned white. Just as Sal wanted to deal with this matter further, the magic pivot had already changed. It happened more than half a day ago. Malygos rarely contacted Alexstrasza. I have something for you. I can't leave. Arthas has moved. He's behind the Heaven's Wrath Gate. I can feel his presence. Then you can send an ancient dragon to get it. That Kristasa I met before is not bad. Let her come. Although the Red Dragon Queen had doubts, out of trust in her brother, she did not think much and directly sent the female ancient red dragon over. No one had expected that Kristasa would be attacked as soon as she entered Malygos' lair in the magic pivot. Malygos caught her off guard and bit the back of her neck. Then, his body, which was larger and more powerful than hers, pressed down on her with the weight of Mount Tai. No. King of the Blue Dragons, what are you doing? No, I was only ordered to get something. The poor female red dragon screamed, but she had no room to struggle. A sneak attack, coupled with the huge difference in strength, she was easily subdued. Kristasa's screams and screams spread throughout the magic pivot. None of the blue dragons knew whether or not Malygos wanted to turn them into his consort. Only Malygos himself knew the answer. No matter what his intentions were, the blue dragons could hear her painful cries and the uneasy whispers she made as she gradually lost her mind. No one dared to question their king. Furthermore, male blue dragons were famous for their tastes. That. Even if Alexstrasza knew, she would only feel wronged for this poor female red dragon. The next day, Malygos, who seemed to be less nervous, walked out of his nest in high spirits. Although all the blue dragons noticed a black spot on their king's chest, no one made a sound. Malygos raised his head high and made a declaration that shocked the world. My battle with Arthes failed. There is only one reason for my failure. My power has been severely weakened. When the Titans of the Pantheon left Azeroth, they personally gave me the responsibility of guarding magic. However, shameless mortals have stolen my authority. Not only did they despicably develop their own way to use magic, they also bypassed my supervision. Without my permission as the king of magic, they contacted the star souls and named themselves as demigods. Yes. This despicable, shameless human, his name is Duke Marcus. Now, in the name of the dragon aspects and the king of magic, I order all intelligent races that can use magic, except the dragons, to immediately cut off all magic circuits and destroy all books and records about magic. And the self-proclaimed demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus, immediately rushed over to kill himself in front of me and cut off his position as a god, returning to the cycle of life. Foolish mortals. I only give you 72 hours to complete all of this. Otherwise, you will face the endless anger of me and my blue dragon army. Chapter 1581. Only 72 hours? And Duque had to commit suicide? This time, even without Duque's reminder, even if Alexstrasza was slow and blinded by kinship, she came to her senses. Isra, something has happened to Malygos. He refused my summons and detained Christasa. Isra hurriedly tried to contact Malygos through dreams, but she was immediately shocked. Sister. Malygos' state is very similar to Nesario's: madness, paranoia, chaos. He was now in a state of déjà vu, which made their hearts sink. Duque is right again. The Red Dragon Queen's voice made people feel as if she was dreaming. Sister, we have to make a decision, Isra whispered. Decision? Easier said than done. Ever since they were created by the Titans, they had gone through so many storms together. The special emotional bond between the chromatic dragon aspects could no longer be described in words. Nesario eventually fell into madness and betrayal because of the whispers of the ancient gods, which was enough to make Alexstrasza's heart ache. She did not expect that after 10,000 years, she would have to face the same heartache again. As a dragon aspect, it was not that she had never thought that she might fall, but it was not at the hands of the powerful Burning Legion demons, but at the claws of her brothers and sisters again. This heartache left her at a loss. In the end, Alexstrasza only said 2 words to Duque: sorry. Duque understood completely. It's not your fault. The Red Dragon Queen only replied to Duque with a sad smile and cut off the communication. Then the Alliance, Horde, and Sleeping Dragon Temple issued a joint statement. The Azeroth dragon aspect, Malygos, the king of magic, was plotted against in a duel with the Lich King. Not only was he insane, but he was also fatally injured. After his death, he will become a bone dragon. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. This not only cast a thick haze over the unstoppable northern expedition, but also indicated that Arthas's strength had been greatly enhanced. The aftermath of its negative effects was still further fermenting. Inside the gate of Heaven's wrath, Arthas let out a cold laugh, as expected of my nemesis, Duke Marcus. He immediately guessed my little trick. But so what? Malygos is already my possession. Duque's guess was right. On the surface, Malygos was still alive and kicking, but in fact, his heart had been completely cut off by Frostmourne. However, Arthas still kept his heart beating, making Malygos look like he was still alive. If Duque hadn't discovered it, then according to the original plan, Malygos would still use this as an excuse to fight Duque over the weave. It might even drag the Dragon Sleep Shrine, who did not know the truth, into the whirlpool of internal strife. It's just that the way it is now is pretty good. A real Dragon King as a mount. Ha ha ha. The Lich King's maniacal laughter reverberated throughout the tunnels. In fact, from the moment Malygos barged into Ice-Crown Fortress like an idiot, everything was destined to be a tragedy. The only difference was how great the loss would be. The Blue Dragon Legion also had intense disagreements. Most of the Blue Dragons were at a loss. On one side was the strict order of their king, and on the other side was the appeal of the four dragon aspects, Alexstrasza, Isra, Nosdormu, and Onyxia. This was different from history. In history, Malygos was indeed an idiot when it came to this matter, but this was more like a battle for justice. That was why most of the Blue Dragons listened to Malygos's orders and even attacked the Dragon Sleep Temple. This time, there was clearly a conspiracy. After all, even the Blue Dragon Legion had heard that the former Lich King, Zul, had caused Arthas to fall. Therefore, when Calegos, who guarded the sun well, unexpectedly publicly announced his opposition to Malygos's orders, the Blue Dragon Legion split. In the Blue Dragon Legion, there were only a little more than 10 ancient dragons or quasi-ancient dragons, and half of them chose to stand with Calegos. The other half brazenly launched a fierce attack on the allied army and Duquesne's weave. On the North Wind Tundra, Gurus Hellscream was galloping wildly on a warg. He raised his axe high and let out a loud battle cry. Ha ha ha! This is the life the orcs should have. His words received widespread approval from the surrounding warriors. Yes. In that barren land, even the lowly laborers seemed to be more valuable than us warriors. Thrall saved millions of orcs from that collapsing world. At first, Thrall received countless praises. As time passed, a series of basic problems such as food, clothing, housing, and transportation caused the orcs to be in conflict. Most of the orcs from Draenor Nagrand were not satisfied with the barrenness of the land. They were not satisfied with the fact that the hides they hunted had to be collected by the Alliance in exchange for grains that they did not like. Even the pork of the pigs raised in the pigsty by the Alliance was not chewy and tasted bad. Only the sharp-toothed wild boar was the right way to go. They also handed over the clan's laborers to the tribe and arranged for them to mine in exchange for food. Their poor wisdom could not understand that Great Chief Thrall had to worry about not letting his people starve to death as much as possible. They would only complain about this and that. Until the northern expedition came. Seeing the fertile land in front of them that resembled Nagrand, seeing the heroic beasts, mammoths, long-haired rhinoceroses, giant spiders, killer whales of Dim Light Bay. The mixed Warsong tribe, which was mainly made up of Nagrand's old Warsong tribe orcs, were so excited that they forgot everything else. Most of them had forgotten the original goal of the crusade against the Lich King, and saw this northern expedition as a Warsong tribe's operation to seize territory. The most powerful tribe should have the most fertile territory. That was how they thought. The Alliance's action of minding their own business had indirectly stimulated the Warsong Orcs encirclement movement. Who knew that a nightmare would suddenly come? In the sky, dozens of giant dragons with blue wings and bodies swooped down from the clouds. Most of the orcs were torn to pieces by the violent rain of magic just because they saw the giant shadows looking up. Countless arcane bombs, frost arrows, blizzards, the blue dragons used a magic feast to open the prelude to the massacre. Blue Dragon Irigos, as the strongest supporter of Malygos, directly launched the fiercest attack on the Warsong stronghold. With a spread of his wings, dozens of compound magic arrays arranged like rings of stars suddenly appeared in the void. These magic arrays, which were the size of half a football field, had dragon runes on their surface flickering, making these magic arrays seem to form a bright belt of light. The belt of light emitted the unique purple glow of arcane magic. This light poured down on the Warsong stronghold, causing the extremely orc-style stronghold parts to twist, deform, and shatter, turning into countless scattered pieces that flew in all directions. Chapter 1582. In the sky, outside the compound magic formation, there were hundreds of looming veins of various sizes. These symbolized that Eligos was frantically extracting elements from a brand new magic net to support the operation of these powerful magic formations. In fact, he was not the only one benefiting. At this moment, a bright river of arcane light was hanging upside down over the entire Northwind Taiga. It floated in the sky where the cold wind howled, like a long river flowing with countless amethyst crystals, emitting a bright light. With its support, the combat power of these blue dragons had more than doubled. The Warsong orcs near the Warsong stronghold suffered a devastating blow. In the midst of the rumbling explosion, many orcs on the sentry towers were blown away with a bang, falling from high places and turning into large red and green meat patties. The unlucky soldiers below the stronghold were either thrown dozens of meters away by the violent explosion and landed heavily on the rugged slope, or had their heads cut in half by a piece of wood. There were also dozens of pieces of wood or iron that pierced through their bodies. They did not turn into corpses on the spot, but they had to suffer for a while before they died. In the wilderness, Garrush had a hard time catching a forgotten mage who was running around. It was a messenger. He grabbed the thin bone by the collar. "Where's the alliance? Didn't those thin guys claim to be our allies? Now their allies have betrayed them. Have they betrayed us too?" The forgotten mage was in extreme pain. Although he did not feel any pain, he still struggled hard. Garush's crude methods embarrassed him. The Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Alliance, and the Horde announced an hour ago that the Blue Dragon King Malygos had been corrupted and was already an enemy. "You ran too far, we couldn't find you at all." Garush was greatly offended. Because this meant that the blame was likely to be on him. He did not regret it because this was a normal hunt for the clan. In Nagrand, there had to be at least one such large-scale hunt every week, or the clan would starve. "No," Garush roared hoarsely. "This is all the fault of the Alliance. This is a trap. They put us here on purpose to lure us." As expected, despicable outsiders cannot be trusted, Garush roared. Little did he know that when he vented his anger and roared, he had unintentionally stated at least one truth. The Forgotten Mage bitterly said, "The Wormrest Temple is not under the Alliance's control." Even Alexstrasza couldn't stop the Blue Dragon King from going crazy and challenging Arthas. This has nothing to do with the Alliance. Moreover, the Alliance was also attacked. He expressed the opinion of the majority. There was nothing wrong with that logic. The Alliance army had a faster reaction time than the Horde because other than the Magic Communication Direct Squadron, the Alliance had many other rapid communication systems. In addition to the spiritual owl communication of the Night Elves, there was also the divine power communication that only the members of the Elun Sisterhood could use. After magical communication became chaotic and intermittent due to Malygos creating a second weave, divine communication became the most effective and fastest method. It was a pity that there were too few female priests who had the ability to use divine power communication. Only high-ranking priests could do so, and they would not be able to use it unless it was a critical moment. What the Alliance was testing was the telegraph. After diesel engines became popular, Duque spent a lot of effort to develop and promote electromagnetic induction generators. It was not difficult to generate electricity by constantly rotating electromagnetic coils. As long as one was in an engineering university, there was no one who couldn't do it. With the advent of electricity, the invention of the telegraph was inevitable. The problem now was the decay of electricity and the problem of heat during the transmission of electricity. High-voltage transmission, then using substations to reduce the voltage back to civilian use, Duque understood the principle, but to put it into practical use, it still required a lot of practice and experiments. At the moment when Duque's weave was being challenged, it was indeed a good time to launch the telegraph system. The closer it was to Malygos' lair, the less efficient Duque's weave was. Of course, the part of the weave that Duque concentrated on protecting was still working well. For example, the two large fulcrum points, Naxxramas and the Fearless Stronghold. The Alliance's communication system did not collapse, and naturally, its defense showed extremely exaggerated efficiency. In the magic mirror, when Duque saw the blue dragons flying from the horizon, he couldn't help but complain, "Who on earth gave them the courage to challenge us?" Then Duque added in a low voice, "I bet it's not Liang Jingru." Seeing the blue baby dragons that were not even baby dragons, Bulang Bronzebeard also sighed. This is definitely a feast for the Dalajan mages. Dragon remains were rare and precious, not to mention the blue dragon scales, fur, and limbs that were rich in magic power. Because of their good relationship with the sleeping dragon temple, except during the second battle of the Dark Portal, when the Red Dragon army was enslaved by the Horde, the Dalajan and Duque ruthlessly plundered a wave of Red Dragon materials. There was no such good opportunity again. Today, a good dragon skin of about 1 square meter could be sold for 10,000 Arathar gold coins. After sighing, Wulang said loudly, "Prepare to use the cannons to tell those big lizards that the anger of mortals is too hot for them to bear." Oh, the soldiers below all showed a state of inexplicable excitement. Under the lead of an ancient colossal blue dragon, more than 10 adult blue dragons led hundreds of dragon whelps, as well as close to 10,000 dragon whelps. They spread their wings and rode the strong winds, sweeping over from 10 kilometers away. Although they were still far from the blue dragon's range of attack, the long river of light and shadow of the arcane magic that swayed in the void behind them had already made the soldiers of Naxxramas realize that if they were to judge their attack power based on their size alone, they would definitely suffer. The blue dragons moved faster than expected, and in just a few blinks of an eye, the blue dots on the horizon became bigger. Although they were still out of sight, with the help of the high magnification periscope, the Alliance's gunners could even see the scales on their wings clearly. The deep blue eyes in the eye sockets and the long, crisscross dragon teeth made people feel even more uncomfortable. Naxxramas was like this, and the fearless fortress was also facing a similar situation. At this time, Duque's voice sounded in the front line of the Alliance army. 23 years ago, in the second battle of the Dark Portal, I led your father's generation, a total of 200,000 troops in front of the wall of Thoradin, and it was difficult to move an inch, all because of the rampage of an ancient red dragon. Today, 23 years later, we face an even more exaggerated opponent. But I want to say, with the development of technology, mortals have really set foot on the world stage. We have cannons. We have airships. We have enough power to destroy all evil. So, I hope everyone will give these guys who dare to go against the tide of history a good look. What technology is. All troops, listen to my order, fire in turn. Chapter 1583. The 800mm cannon was the first to fire. As early as the end of the second battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance had already taken out a small steel cannon with a diameter of more than 1 meter. That kind of mortar with a very short range and a large arc trajectory was powerful, but its range was really not impressive. This 800mm cannon was the true definition of modern artillery. Its effective range was more than 30 kilometers. Because of its craftsmanship, it was different from the Gustav railway cannon in Earth's history. It used lighter shells, not the original 7.1-ton armor-piercing shells, but high-explosive shells that weighed only 2 tons and 1.5 tons of Type 3 shells. This greatly increased its firing speed. Moreover, with the dwarves who could carry the shells by themselves, even the loader was not needed, and the result was that it could fire 20 rounds an hour. This was a very impressive figure. One had to know that the original version could fire 14 rounds a day. Yes, that's right, it could only fire 14 rounds a day. Of course, every time a cannon was fired, it would definitely blow up the entire mountain. This new giant cannon, no matter what model, weighed more than 30 tons and could not be installed on any ship. Because no ship could withstand its terrifying recoil, and even a dozen brakes couldn't do it, the current craftsmanship could not be used as a railway cannon. In the end, it became an out-and-out Longsong cannon. Wulang Bronzebeard had shamelessly named this cannon, Wulang Cannon, by rolling on the floor of the throne hall. This huge cannon with a range of more than 10 kilometers shocked the blue dragons when it was fired. When they saw this shell coming at a high speed with an initial speed of more than a kilometer per second, they instinctively wanted to block this shell with magic. Unfortunately, when they greeted it with ice arrows, they were shocked to find that the shell was actually engraved with a magic protection array. A faint light lit up, and nearly 10 spells were completely absorbed. No more spells were fired. It was not an easy task to intercept a high-speed flying shell. Just now, more than 100 spells were fired, and only a few were hit. Then, there was an ear-shattering explosion. Countless blazing fragments sputtered out from the cannonball, and in an instant, the blue dragons in a spherical area with a radius of 100 meters were wiped out. Regardless of whether it was a baby dragon that was not much bigger than a wolf dog, a baby dragon that was 5 meters long and had a wingspan of 8 meters, or an adult dragon, all of them were hit by the third cannon style 1 cannon. Countless pillars of blood spurted out of their bodies as they screamed and fell to the ground. Charge! Charge! The leading ancient dragon was starting to panic. With the hardness of his scales, he would be able to take the blast head-on. However, he was the only ancient giant dragon in the entire blue dragon troop. Fortunately, each stronghold only had 3 or 4 long-song cannons. Although the power was great and the sound was frightening, the low frequency of the bombardment made the loss within an acceptable range. The blue dragon began to accelerate. Within the range of 5,000 meters. The flying battleships and medium-caliber cannons on both sides of the stronghold also began to fire. After a flash of flame and rising smoke, the cannonball came whistling over. In the deafening roar of the cannons, the damage caused by these 400mm cannons also shocked the blue dragons. They had no choice but to use their S-shaped maneuvers to rush over. Even closer, on the wall of the fortress on the side facing the dragons, countless complicated and intricate arrays suddenly flashed through the holes. In the void, there were also purple magic veins that provided magic support for these large and small arrays. Immediately, countless fireballs, ice arrows, and arcane cannonballs smashed out. With the support of the large-scale war arrays, these spells had a longer range and more power than ordinary mage's spells. A magic storm welcomed in front of the blue dragons. The dense spells crossed hundreds of meters and swept across the entire group of dragons like a storm in May. This time, these flying dragons that came to attack the Alliance under the command of their mad king no longer had any luck. The high density and powerful anti-air cannons and magic made all dodging and defense meaningless. In an instant, their wings were pierced or their bodies were directly blown up, and they fell from the sky while wailing. The land and the sea in front of the 2 strongholds were all dyed by this dirty blue blood rain that exuded arcane brilliance. That's it? On the 2 strongholds, the gunners operating the short-range anti-air cannons were stunned. My 8-barreled cannon hasn't even been fired yet. The concentrated anti-air cannons often did not have a good range. The real effective range was often about 500 meters. Since the long-range cannons had been solved with Type 3 bombs, then there was no need for the short-range anti-air cannons. A group of nervous anti-air cannons before the war all had constipated expressions. A middle-aged officer slapped the back of the head of the complaining gunner and scolded, "Damn it. If Commander Marcus could come up with so many good things during the Second Battle of the Dark Portal, I wouldn't have to shiver like a cat in a pond." The gunner touched the back of his head, which was a little painful. "Why didn't Sir Commander take them out back then?" Bullshit. Technology is not that easy to make a leap. Even if Sir Commander is a true genius, it still takes countless scientists and craftsmen to turn his vision into real equipment step by step. In the North Wind Taiga, the situation of the Alliance and the Horde formed a sharp contrast. The Warsong clan was like a rabbit being chased, with countless beast men being chased all over the mountains. The blue dragons used magic to wreak havoc on the squads of beastmen soldiers who dared to resist. From time to time, they swooped down and hooked the beastmen with their sharp claws, tearing them apart in the air, or catching them in midair and throwing them down in freefall. Garush lost his mind and angrily ordered the wyverns to attack. As a result, in front of the purer chromatic dragons, the wyverns that had once swaggered around were all trembling. The lucky ones directly ran away with their knights, not listening to any commands, but at least they managed to keep their lives. The unlucky ones were directly targeted by the adult blue dragons. 2 blue dragons flew over, grabbed the wyverns with even more rapid movements, and tore them into pieces in midair, forming a stinking rain of blood. The Alliance, it's all the Alliance's fault. Garush roared wildly, but he really couldn't do anything about the flying lizards that were flying high and low. After the few wyverns and a few ballistae were slaughtered or destroyed, the Warsong clan on this land completely collapsed. At the same time, in the elemental domain invisible to mortals, Duque was engaged in a real magic battle with Maligos. Chapter 1584. Duque had once imagined that the two webs would fight for Azeroth's elemental energy, just like a hacker war. The two opponents would stay in areas where they couldn't see each other, remotely controlling everything in the network world, frantically attacking each other's positions, searching for each other's location, in order to deal a fatal blow. In reality, Duque had thought too much. If this battle for the Demon King was described as a hacker war, it was more like one side had prepared a virus, a firewall, and so on, while the other side ran to the other side's building and pulled the switch. What kind of illusory war was this? Because both sides knew where the other was, the so-called magic war was like a brawl from the start. Duque had never thought that Maligos, who was destined to die, would be so shameless as to think of a way to cut off the flow of elemental energy in the upwind path where Karazhan was located. As the magic guardian dragon left behind by the Titans, he did indeed know a lot of the elemental mysteries of Azeroth, such as the specific location of the elemental river that extended from the planet's mantle, through the crust, and to the shallow surface of the upwind path. Maligos couldn't make such a large elemental river disappear completely, but he could make it temporarily change course. If Duque really was one of those traditional mages in Azeroth who relied on the mage tower to display their full strength, then he would be kneeling by now. The mage tower of Karazhan, which had once bloomed with dazzling arcane light day and night, now only maintained a minimum amount of light. Without the supply of elemental veins, the tower looked dim. To maintain the operation of the entire mage tower, they had to use the elemental energy stored in the elemental pool. For Duque, who was about to start a magic war, it could be said that his reinforcements had been cut off. He could certainly defend Karazhan to the death and continue to use Karazhan as the center of the webs to fight Maligos for control of the entire world's webs. This way, it would be like a lonely castle. Perhaps he could defend it for a while, but in the end, it would still fall. There was a saying in the art of war, a lonely city cannot be defended. Duque's lips curled into a cold smile. Arthas, good plan. Sindagosa was a good fighter. She had been ambushed by Duque, and Arthas naturally felt that it was a pity. But it wasn't painful. Because the fallen Maligos was the powerful subordinate he truly desired. With the powerful physical body of a dragon king and the magical ability that Arthas desperately lacked, such a powerful undead was the only thing that could truly help Arthas. Over here, Duque had clearly beaten Arthas into a dog, but Maligos, the brainless pig of a teammate, had to go over to serve himself. Duque was also speechless. When Maligos no longer acted on his own fantasies and delusions, he immediately became a super expert. For example, if Maligos successfully dismantled Duque's magic net core and inflicted heavy damage to Duque's magic net, the several 100,000 allied armies in Nocent would immediately lose their most powerful defensive magic system. All of the Alliance's mages would lose 50% of their power, as most of the military mages used the weave as a standard for learning and casting spells. Without the weave, many mages who forcefully advanced felt as though they were in a desert of elements, unable to draw even the slightest bit of elemental energy to support their magic. At that time, if Arthas joined forces with Maligos to launch a large-scale ice storm or something, the allied army would definitely suffer heavy losses, and they might even be in danger of being wiped out. Fortunately, Maligos, you're so inexperienced that you don't even know what the Cloud Age is, right? As a transmigrator who had experienced the birth of the internet to its explosive development, there were too many concepts on the internet that could be used for reference in the magic net. For example, the battle between single-core and multi-core. There was also the concept of cloud storage. Maligos was now like a super single-core computer with a super high-frequency CPU. His data storage ability and computing ability were all crushing Duque's. This was where his pride came from. Even if Duque had the help of the system elf, he might not be Maligos' match in a one-on-one fight. After all, as the king of magic, his brain capacity and ability to command and cast multiple spells were definitely godly in the truest sense. However, ever since Duque established the magic net, he had never intended to play with a single-core CPU. What he played was a classic multi-core. From Khadgar as the core, to the Demon King Vec lore who later joined as the secondary core, and then to the group of elemental emissaries. Then there were Jaina and Solarian who were the support controllers, as well as the Kirin Tor assembly led by Kale, and the high-ranked Dalajan mages. Almost every powerhouse above the Radiant Moon level was a commander in a certain area of the magic net. Duque had split up the authority of the magic net, causing the magic net to show unimaginable diversity. As for Khadgar and Duque's system elves, they only existed as coordinators. As for the cloud storage, it was actually the result of Duque's direct control of the magic nodes of most of the Alliance's main cities, transforming them into nodes of the magic net. Other than Darnassus, which was directly controlled by Alun, and Exodar, which was controlled by the Drenii, all the main cities were deeply connected to the magic net. The four major elements of earth, water, fire, and wind existed in parallel space across the entire planet of Azeroth. Every main city of the Alliance, in addition to having a superior geographical environment, was also the location of nodes of elemental veins of different sizes. Duque had completely copied the magic net blueprint and stored it in every main city of the Alliance that was under his control. It could be said that unless Malygos cut off the flow of magic nodes in all the main cities of the Alliance, as long as Duque's mind was connected to the magic net, he could send the highest authority to the magic net through any main city. In fact, after Malygos cut off the flow of the elemental river between the two main cities, he realized that something was wrong. Duque's control over the humans' magic net was not affected at all. Instead, he launched a fierce counterattack. First was the water element. Most blue dragons like to play with the ice element. They felt that ice was very beautiful. Malygos' specialty was arcane magic, and he was also very good at playing with the ice element. Now, Duque's counterattack from the magic net made him very uncomfortable. Duque had cut off the supply of ice element to his magic core. Originally, Malygos had thought that this was impossible. The truth in front of him deeply stimulated him. Duque's virtual image was projected on a desolate island in the western outer sea of the North Wind Tundra. Next to Duque's projection stood a huge water elemental. "You've worked hard, Duke Hydarsis. My most loyal friend. It's an honor for us, the Hydarsia water elementals, to be able to serve you." This was the water elemental's way of returning the favor. Duque led the mortal heroes and killed the clone of the Balrog Ragnaros. He also cooperated with the Hydarsia water elementals to drown the entire molten core. The Hydarsia water elementals had always remembered this kindness. Chapter 1585. Duque couldn't figure out the connection between the water elemental creatures of the current material world and the water elemental world that coexisted in another space dimension in the world of Azeroth. Anyway, he could feel that the frost elements leading to the magic core had been completely cut off. It was the same kind of cut off and diversion, but Hydraxia's water element was much more beautiful. Malygos's cut off was actually a diversion, not a real cut off. As long as Duque spent some time, he could still find a new elemental vein. The cut-off of the water element was really the kind that cut off without leaving a way out. Above the north wind taiga. Kacha. It was a sound that did not exist in the ears of mortals. Only existences sensitive to elements could hear this sound that sounded weak but was actually shocking. All the blue dragons who were fighting felt their hearts skip a beat. A huge wave of frost elements gathered from all directions in the north wind taiga. It wasn't gathering, but escaping. As if the stopper was pulled out of a water tank, all the frost elements near the Warsong stronghold were sucked into the void. Ripples of unease rippled in this elemental airspace, spreading in all directions. At this moment, all the Alliance and Horde mages in the north wind taiga could not sense the existence of frost elements at the same time. The only place that could make them feel the frost elements was Duque's magic net. Unfortunately, the magic net had shrunk so much that as long as they were more than 200 meters away from Naxxramas or the Fearless Stronghold, they could no longer summon frost elements. The blue dragons in the sky widened their eyes in horror. Their yellow vertical pupils looked left and right. At this time, they found that not only the water elemental world, but even the fire elemental world was no longer responding. Someone so powerful that they were unrivaled had forcibly cut off their connection with the fire elemental world. Alarms rang in their hearts. The blue dragons finally woke up from their dream of being invincible. Times had changed. It was no longer the era 25,000 years ago when the dragons covered the sky, stood at the top of the food chain, and could do whatever they wanted. Hydraxia's water element sealed the source of Maligo's frost element. By killing Lager's clone, Duque, who controlled part of the fire elemental realm's authority, also sealed the source of Maligo's fire element. At this moment, Maligo's dragon weave, which used the magic pivot as its core, seemed a little unworthy of its name. The only core element left in Maligo's was the arcane element. Azeroth magic was very interesting. There were 6 main categories: arcane, frost, fire, nature, holy, and shadow. The origin of the world was clearly earth, water, fire, and wind. Water and fire each formed their own system, but earth and wind were included in the natural system. Nature magic was generally considered to be on the side of shamans and druids, and was not considered to be part of traditional magic. Holy was on the side of priests. Although it was magic, it was not under Maligo's control. Not to mention Aning. The Titan granted Maligo's the authority of the King of Magic, which was the authority to manage the magic of the 3 elements, arcane, ice, and fire. At this time, both ice and fire couldn't be used, leaving only the arcane element. Thus, the Warsong beast men who were suffering in the vicinity of the Warsong stronghold were stunned to discover that the originally ferocious blue dragons, who were incessantly flapping their wings to drive away the ice elements and turn one beast man after another into ice sculptures, were suddenly silenced. The magic that could be used had become pure arcane magic. Gurus, who was still fighting fiercely below, could be said to have the deepest understanding of this. As a warrior who had stepped into the realm of heroes, Gurus was much more durable than the small fries. In addition, Sal valued him and gave him a set of Mount Hyjar level warrior equipment. He became the only bright spot in this collapsed battlefield. In terms of hand-to-hand combat, Gurus was not inferior to these young or newly adult blue dragons at all. His gorgeous equipment allowed him to clean up one with a few axes. However, the blue dragons could also play magic. A large-scale, ice shield, no matter how fast you were, once you entered the range of the shield, you would slow down and suffer frost elemental damage. The jump slash he had learned from his father had become a clown's awkward move. Often, he would be frozen in midair like an ice sculpture the moment he jumped high. Even if the blue dragons did not slap him down with their claws or tails, he would still fall in a ridiculous free fall. The blue dragons suddenly couldn't use frost magic, so his chance came. With a big jump, he stepped on the wreckage of a ballista that had been blown away and performed a beautiful double jump. Garrush was like a rock spreading its wings, pouncing on a young blue dragon that could not dodge in time. In a panic, the young dragon barely flapped its wings and dodged to the left, but because of the angle and momentum, the dragon's neck was grabbed by Gurus, who reacted faster. With a backhand swing of his axe, Gurus chopped off the young dragon's neck. Holding the long dragon's neck in his hand and swinging the limp dragon's head, Garrush fell to the ground with a loud crash, raising a huge cloud of dust and letting out a deafening roar. Garrush, who had fallen into a frenzied state of killing, did not know a human proverb that someone had passed on to him: don't show off, or else you'll be struck by lightning. In every tribe, there would always be a small number of mutants. For example, Krasus of the Red Dragon clan was a rare master magician among the dragons. Galagos, the ancient blue dragon leading the team, was, in a sense, an ancient blue dragon that was not recorded in Azeroth's official history. However, he was indeed different from the blue dragons. For example, his element was wind. Seeing how Garrush was so awesome, killing several blue dragons in a row, and then demonstrating his might and roaring, Galagos sent a lightning strike to Garrush. Bam, just a moment ago, he had used a roar to replace who else? Garrush, who had come to mock the group, collapsed on the spot, his long fangs gnawing on the frozen soil of the North Wind tundra. Perhaps it was because of the dizziness and paralysis caused by the lightning strike that interfered with his movements, but Garrush did not get up for a long time. Just as Galagos rushed down from the sky, a surging arcane dragon's breath brewing in his mouth, a 10-story tall human shadow suddenly appeared in the void. It was the shadow of Duke Marcus, the demigod of the weave. Duque's shadow raised his left hand gently, and a burly figure that looked 70 to 80% like Garrush rushed out of a portal that suddenly opened. He leaped high like lightning, and the blood-red axe swung from bottom to top like a moon at the bottom of the sea. It was clearly an upward chop with similar movements, but this chop gave Garrush an unparalleled shock to his soul. It was a chop that could split the heavens and the earth. The cold air hovering in the air, the storm, the turbulence of arcane elements. These things that could not be seen with the naked eye were all swept away by the aftermath of this chop. The next second, Galagos let out an extremely shocking scream. Chapter 1586. A guy who had the ability to severely injure an ancient dragon with an axe was rare, even among the heroes. If it was an orc, then the range was even smaller. Garrush struggled to get up and looked into the sky. A blue claw as huge as the pillar of the hall was spinning in the air. In the background, there was a sky full of splashing blue-purple blood, shining with arcane light, and a giant dragon with a face full of fear. The ancient dragon, who had a mocking expression a moment ago, had its facial features squeezed together because of fear. An adult blue dragon fiercely pounced over. The green figure falling from the sky suddenly twisted his waist so that his body was parallel to the ground. In the next moment, the falling momentum suddenly stopped. This change in rhythm made the adult blue dragon, who was trying to sneak attack, extremely uncomfortable. Just as the blue dragon flapped its wings to slow down so that it could aim at the orc again, the tall and sturdy figure launched, intercept. A horizontal movement in the air that violated the laws of physics. A blood-red arc of axe light lit up again. Then, the dust settled. Another cloud of blood mist exploded. Another blue dragon that was struck down. The Blue Dragon Legion in the sky seemed to be completely shocked by this scene. They all let out terrified screams and flapped their wings in panic to escape at high speed. Only then did the tall and sturdy figure descend from the sky and land heavily in front of Garrush. Under the effect of gravity, this figure was like a giant, but also like an insurmountable mountain. Mortals could only look up. Many middle-aged orcs recognized this great orc. Ah! It's Grom Hellscream. So young. I heard that he turned to the human demigods and became an oracle to obtain eternal life. What a pity. But he will always be the great hero of our clan and even the entire tribe. After a short moment of hesitation, the simple minds of the orcs made them unconsciously cheer for the real hero. Grom, 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 the warsong beast men who were lucky enough to survive the siege of the Blue Dragon Legion all beat their chests with their fists, using the most traditional and primitive method to pay their respects to their former chief, the great hero who would forever stand on the monument of their tribe. Looking at the familiar and unfamiliar face in front of him, Garrush had mixed feelings. This face overlapped with the face of her father in her childhood memories. Young, arrogant, and filled with an insufferably domineering aura. There was no powerful prey that his father couldn't catch. Even the legendary powerful monster Galan, who could not be dealt with by an entire clan, fell at his father's feet. That was why he was able to inherit a great surname, Hellscream. He would not be like those lowly laborers who did not deserve to have their own surnames. Garrush's emotions were extremely complicated. Once upon a time, as a pure-blooded orc, he felt ashamed because his father was the first to drink the devil's blood. When he found out that his father had not betrayed the tribe, but had successfully killed Manaroth, who had deceived the entire tribe, he was overjoyed and proud of his father. Later, my father got old and couldn't fight anymore. His perception of his father took another 180-degree turn. Why don't you die on the battlefield before you grow old? Die a ridiculous death on a sickbed? You don't look like a great orc warrior at all. You actually want to become that human demigod's servant to repay a debt of gratitude after your death? The great orcs never need to repay any kindness to anyone other than the orcs. Hero. Pfft, nearly a year ago, the strong and healthy Garush scoffed at his father, who was old and weak and constantly tortured by his old injuries. Who would have thought that this day would come? At this moment, at this second. In front of this fortress named after the glorious battle song. The person who turned the tide and saved the Warsong clan was not him, Garush, but his father, who he regarded as the shame of the clan and even the entire tribe. Climbing up from the ground, Garush's protruding fangs were still stained with dirt. His face was flushed with shame. Fortunately, as a pure-blooded orc, his reddish-brown skin covered up his embarrassment. He should have called him father. But the inferiority complex of the past, coupled with the arrogant declaration he had made to his old father before his death, made him completely at a loss as to what kind of expression he should use to face this legendary and contradictory father, who had also become a human oracle after death. His mouth squirmed for a long time, but in the end, not a single word came out. Interestingly, as his father, Grom, also did not say a word. Of course, his slightly sighing and sorrowful eyes could also be translated as son. Dad is very disappointed in you. In this regard, Duque, who was in midair as a spectator, felt that it was very funny. If this scene was accompanied by Beethoven's Symphony of Fate, in that sorrowful music, Duque would probably instantly lose his character and laugh out loud. As a transmigrator, of course, Duque knew why the famous Garush was called Brainless Roar. The stupid things he had done in the original history were simply brainless. Duque, who was familiar with history, did indeed have the opportunity to help Brainless Roar change his fate. The problem was, why did Duque have to do this? In the past, Duque had hoped to redeem Arthas and stop him from going astray. But he and Karazhan were blown into the void. No matter how many times he thought about it, Duque still felt that Arthas' fall was the result of a mixture of chance and necessity. The current Brainless Roar, regardless of whether his high IQ of 5 could be saved. First of all, as a human, Duque was not in the position to help an orc or even help the entire tribe become stronger. Teaching a foreign barbarian race to stab themselves to death with a knife was something that Duque would never do. Secondly, the rise of the pure-blooded orcs, represented by Brainless Roar, was already an irreversible trend in the tribe. Sal could not let millions of his compatriots die in Draenor. So, more pure-blooded orcs entered Azeroth than the total number of the tribe at that time. Although it strengthened the tribe's population, it also formed the strongest impact on the tribe's existing ideology. If there was enough food and territory in a peaceful environment, Sal could have brainwashed this group of conservative purebloods to accept new things for another 20 years. Perhaps the tribe could achieve a smooth transition. However, in history, the tribe's territory was twice as large as today's, and they still could not solve this contradiction. In this world, where Duque had premeditated to command the Alliance to seriously squeeze the tribe's living space, how could the tribe make a smooth transition? Sal was now equivalent to being roasted on a fire. As long as the pressure from foreign enemies weakened a little, the contradictions in the tribe were bound to erupt like a volcano. In conclusion, Duque could see it clearly. Whether he killed Brainless Roar in advance or not, there would be new pure-blooded orc heroes who would challenge Sal's leadership and shake the foundation of the tribe's rule. Sooner or later, something would happen to the tribe anyway, so it was better to keep Brainless Roar. At least Duque did not have to be the clown, and he did not have to do this and that behind Grom's back. Chapter 1587. In terms of talent, Brain-Dead Roar was indeed unparalleled. In the realm of warriors, he could even beat Sal. In terms of warriors, only the Ox Chief Cain Bloodhoof could beat him in the entire tribe. However, Duque already had Lord Howl, so why would he still need Brain-Dead Roar? Comparing the way Brain-Dead Roar cut the adult blue dragon and the way Lord Howl cut the ancient blue dragon, the difference was obvious. Brain-Dead Roar would only blindly squander his talent, mindlessly slashing at the enemy's vital points, completely ignoring any changes in the process. After Master Roar regained the body that was at its peak when he was 18 years old, his 50 years of rich combat experience was undoubtedly revealed in the strike just now. Changing the rhythm just right, he seized the fleeting opportunity to strike fiercely after disrupting the opponent. Adjusting the direction of the axe blade with his wrist, he skillfully dodged the adult blue dragon's final counterattack. Without reducing his speed and strength, he avoided the hardest head of the dragon race and cut diagonally into the dragon's neck, causing the greatest damage. It was no exaggeration to say that with an indestructible 18-year-old body and half a century of bloody battle experience, Lord Howl was worthy of the title of a legendary hero. Only such a Grom Hellroar was the peak of the peak, worthy of Duque breaking the boundaries between the Alliance and the tribe and accepting him as a god's messenger. In the sky, Duque clearly saw the hilarious scene of Lord Howl and his son staring at each other without saying a word. The relationship between Orc father and son was quite deep, but the way they got along was often clumsy. Just like how Duroden could sacrifice himself to save Sal. However, most fathers would only teach their children to be great warriors, but not how to be a human. Sal in this life only had Orgrim's personal guidance to achieve his current achievements. Lord Howl and his son, anyway, Duque could not bear to watch. On the eastern horizon of Battlecry's stronghold, a dense cluster of black dots suddenly appeared. In the blink of an eye, the black dots could be seen in color: red, green, bronze, and a small amount of blue. The distant roar of dragons from the sky announced that the previously silent Dragon Sleep Temple was finally making a big move. At a glance, thousands of giant dragons covered the sky. They were galloping from the more eastern Dragonbone wilderness. With 3 guardian dragons that were as large as small mountains in the lead, they were accompanied by 2 smaller black dragons and blue dragons on both sides, forming the first echelon of attack. Behind them were hundreds of ancient giant dragons, then thousands of adult giant dragons, and tens of thousands of young dragons. This time, the 5-colored giant dragons had come out in full force. On the ground, Garush finally understood why the blue dragons had fled in panic. With their strength, going against Long Sleep Shrine's main force was simply sending themselves to their deaths. Sigh. Lord Howl sighed. He did not know what tone he should use to communicate with his son. He knew that his son hated him. Lord Howl of life. He however, in the face of his son in trouble, in the face of the calamity of the clan that he had sacrificed his entire life for, he simply could not bear it. Roof. Dragon of. Duque did as he wished. The person was saved, but the person who was saved did not even say a word of thanks. Grom's heart must be very complicated. At this time, Grom raised his famous blood howl, and shouted, "The blood of our brethren cannot be shed in vain. Today's grudge will be avenged today. Those who are still breathing, follow me to kill the demonic pivot and slaughter those treacherous blue dragons." Oh, hundreds and thousands of people responded. As long as the beast men could still fight, they simply bandaged their wounds and followed Grom to kill their way to the shore. The battle in the sky was destined to have nothing to do with the Warsong beast men, but the Draconians and Draconians loyal to Maligos on the ground could be slaughtered to vent their anger. Grom had to do this. A defeated clan would definitely be looked down upon by the other beast men clans. If he didn't want the clan that had given birth to him, raised him, and made him fight for his whole life to fall, he had to lead these defeated soldiers to pay blood for blood in the shortest time possible. Perhaps for a dead former chief, this was crossing the line. At this time, Grom's first consideration was the legacy of the clan, not the face of the son of the Warsong tribe's chief. When Grom reached out to his son with his right hand, he wanted to pull him up. "Come, slap." Garush slapped his father's hand away. "I can fight. I can get up myself." With that, Garush gripped his battle axe and rushed to the front of the group. "Warsong beast men. Follow your chief, forward." The Warsong beast men all looked at Grom. When they saw Grom nod slightly, everyone followed Garush's steps. This made Garush feel even more ashamed. The shadow of Duque in the sky no longer looked at the warsong beastmen. The shadow gradually became real. Duque's real body had already descended into the sky above the Northwind tundra. Beside him, several elemental emissaries stood in the air. At this time, Alexstrasza arrived. Alexstrasza, it's time to put an end to this. Okay. The Red Dragon Queen's huge head nodded slightly. Nothing saddened her more than her own flesh and blood killing each other. On the other side, Onyxia lowered her head slightly, revealing the back of her neck. As long as Duque nodded, a chair would appear on her dragon's back for Duque to sit on. Duque sent a telepathic message. Today isn't suitable. Onyxia, who no longer had any integrity, obviously didn't mind being Duque's mount as a dragon aspect. The other dragon aspects did. After all, this was a battle between the dragon aspects. Even Calegos had stood up for him. If Maligos was proven not to have stepped into the realm of death, the dragon aspects would try to solve the problem through dialogue. If Maligos really did die, then before he became a bone dragon, no, a Dracolic even more terrifying than a dragon of death, the dragon's slumber temple would really have to destroy Maligos. Looking at the floating magic island standing on the western horizon, Duque was filled with emotion. He could restrict Maligos from obtaining the two major elements of ice and fire, but he couldn't do anything about the arcana. The arcana didn't come from the four major elements. As for the origin of the arcana, it was impossible to know. Arcana magic was more like the Pantheon's unique source magic. In theory, the arcana energy was an even more primitive energy. Since there wasn't a single arcana world, the mysterious arcana energy could never be cut off. With Maligos' ability, he could even infinitely convert the other elements in the world into arcana energy. Rather than using the magic net as an arena to fight an endless tug-of-war, it would be better to put all his chips on the line and eliminate Maligos in terms of material concepts, ending everything once and for all. Chapter 1588. Oh Maligos. I see that you have a fierce look on your face, and your bones aren't special. You're wearing a green grassland on your head and whatnot. His wife was ridden by Arthas as a mount, and even he had to be ridden by Second Fool. So dragon liches and bone dragons aren't suitable for you. Yes, birds. Ghost dragon, not bad. Green ghost dragon king. High and mighty. Go, go. Duque had already made up his mind to get rid of Maligos in the magic pivot. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fun if Maligos and Arthas merged. After all, Maligos was also a king. If the two kings merged and Arthas really became an ice dragon knight, then the power would be too great. One had to know that this wasn't the concept of 1 + 1 = 2, it was equal to 3, equal to 4. Although Second Fool was strong, the lack of super powerful magic skills was a hurdle that he couldn't avoid with the Death Knight template. Once Maligos fell into the trap, the consequences would be unimaginable. Duque had to make the first move to gain the upper hand. For the army of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the distance of 100 or 200 kilometers would only take a short while to kill. The magic pivot was the Blue Dragon Army's nest in the center of the Kodara Highlands in the northwest of the Northwind Tundra. It was surrounded by countless lightning-like arcane energy, and there were dark black ice buildings everywhere, as well as vertical icicles. Several ancient blue dragons led a small army of blue dragons and hung outside the magic pivot. In front of the incomparably huge Sleeping Dragon Coalition army, these few hundred blue dragons weren't enough at all. Lady Alexstrasza, Lord Nosdormu, Lord Isra, Lord Onyxia, even if you have the status of dragon aspect, bringing a dragon army to the magic pivot is still an offense to the Blue Dragon Army. The leading ancient dragon lowered his head slightly. Oligos. This is none of your business. Get Maligos to come out and see me. Otherwise, even if I have to dismantle the magic pivot, I will see him today. Alexstrasza didn't fall for it at all. She didn't give the ancient blue dragon any chance to play tricks. Duque squinted at the blue dragon and chuckled in his heart. In the original history, this guy lost the competition with Carrie and joined the Twilight Legion. In the end, he was stabbed in the back by Blackmore from another time and space, and his blood was used to activate the nuclear bomb, Focused Rainbow. Right now, Duque just smiled and didn't say anything. Half of the Blue Dragon Legion was frauds, while the other half was weaklings. Anyway, there were too many things to complain about. Duque didn't even know where to start. On the other side, facing the aggressive Red Dragon Queen, the three dragon aspects, and their own traitor, Calegos, who was leading a group of opponents. Even Oligos couldn't handle it. Alright, I'll go ask His Majesty Maligos. Then, a drama of slipping away was staged. Damn, when it flew away, even its tail was drooping. Originally, Duque didn't think that Maligos would come out. In Duque's imagination, anyone with a bit of brain would choose to escape directly, or even kidnap a large number of blue dragons to escape to the Ice Crown Glacier. But he didn't know if it was because Arthas didn't completely control Maligos, or because he simply gave a mental hint and didn't make a move. The entire magic pivot suddenly shook violently. The surrounding clouds were all shaken away by this surging arcane energy. After a burst of dazzling purple-blue arcane energy blossomed like a flower, a huge blue dragon flew out from the magic gate of the magic pivot. Roar! He didn't know if Maligos's high IQ was driving him, or if his soul was still stuck in the past 10,000 years ago, thinking that he was still the lord of all things, the dragon aspect that was regarded as holy by all creatures. Anyway, being stared at by that pair of golden vertical pupils, Duque didn't feel anything. Instead, he seemed to be smiling. Maligos opened his mouth and revealed his fangs. Haha. My brothers and sisters. Are you also here to witness this despicable person who blasphemed the holy domain of magic, the self-proclaimed demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus, commits suicide in front of me? Duque was instantly out of character. Please forgive Duque. Even though he was the best actor from the 1st to the 26th Azeroth Dark Portal, Duque still had the urge to quit acting. Alexstrasza wanted to say something, but Duque interrupted. Maligos, do you recognize what this is? With that, Duque raised the thing in his hand high, and then Duque slowly flew towards Maligos under the support of the wind element. Oh. Maligos looked at Duque coldly. He stared coldly at the thing in Duque's hand. Although he knew at first glance that he didn't recognize it, he enjoyed the feeling of looking down at the tiny Duque. After a while, he replied slowly, I don't recognize it. What's wrong with it? Duque wasn't annoyed. This thing is called a soul casket. It contains the soul of the great Drenii Holy Light Teacher. Perhaps you don't know, but he was the one who fought against the two Burning Legion commanders, Archimonde and Jaden, 25,000 years ago. He was one of the three giants of Eridar. Huh. The indifferent Maligos still didn't know what he was facing. On the contrary, the dragon face that still looked lively had an expression of waiting to watch a show. Seeing this, Duque didn't want to continue acting. Duque shouted, if you've fallen, then please accept the punishment of the holy light. As soon as he finished speaking, the soul box suddenly emitted a brilliant golden light. The dazzling divine radiance instantly covered the entire magic core area. It was as bright as the rising sun, but the entire sleeping dragon legion and almost all the blue dragons didn't feel anything. Holy light was a typical holy spiritual energy. It didn't do any harm to the righteous formation or even the neutral. Instead, those with good intentions would be encouraged and enjoy additional combat power. 99% of the dragons were fine. Except for one dragon, the great king of magic, Maligos. Wah, despicable humans. You, what did you do to me? The blue dragon king, which was almost half the size of a town, flapped his wings desperately. The arcane energy swirling under his wings was like illusory colorful clouds. When the colorful clouds formed turbulence and dissipated in the air, the sparks of arcane light had already formed arcane missiles of different sizes. When these highly concentrated arcane missiles landed on the ground, the entire open space in front of the magic core region was bombarded by elemental missiles. There were terrifying continuous explosions everywhere. In the sky, the giant dragons that were hovering were all stunned. Many of the giant dragons almost forgot to flap their wings and fell. Every dragon could clearly see that there was a huge decaying wound on Malaiko's chest. Chapter 1589. The circular wound was so huge. Putting aside the dark aura around the wound, just the size of the wound alone was enough for a carriage to run through. Even giant dragons were shocked to see it. In the eyes of the blue dragons who followed Malaiko's, their boss chest had only lost a scale and left a sword mark. In the eyes of the dragons, this injury was no different from a mosquito bite for a human. It was not a big deal. However, in front of Old Man Valen's ultra-pure holy light, all concealment was meaningless. The dark power of Frostmourne had not only pierced through Malaiko's chest, but also his heart. The Blue Dragon King had actually died the moment it was stabbed. It was purely the heart that continued to move under the drive of the dark power, maintaining Malaiko's life on the surface. Arthas also very cunningly did not let his power seep into Malaiko's blood. He only captured the Dragon King's heart and affected Malaiko's will. Malaiko's, who was already seriously deranged, did not even realize that he had been manipulated. He thought that it was a decision made by his own will. If not for Duque's holy light at the beginning, the kind-hearted Alexstrasza might have really been fooled by Malaiko's. She might have thought that her brother was just having a mental episode again and not betraying the path of guardians. Holy light and the power of shadow were never compatible. Perhaps it was possible to transform holy light and shadow like Duque, but there was no way they could exist in the same place at the same time. Malaiko still seemed to be alive on the surface, but in reality, he had already stepped into the realm of death. Under the holy light, it directly melted, revealing the dark heart that was in intense conflict with the power of holy light but still beating. Wow! Even if he is a dragon king, with such an injury, I'm afraid. On the surface, Onyxia was concerned about Malaiko's. The Black Dragon Princess, who did not have a good nature, was not interested in this emotional world. She was actually indirectly reminding Alexstrasza and the other two dragons that it was time to work. Shock. Sadness. Heartache. She did not want to admit this was the truth, but she had already experienced cruel betrayal once. Malaiko's passive betrayal made Alexstrasza feel better. Oh, he was actually forced. He fell for the Lich King's tricks and sorcery. Nosdormu was the first to accept reality. As the space-time Dragon King, he had seen countless futures. In those divergent branches of history, Malaiko's had died for no reason and looked for his own *T so many times that he was too lazy to complain. As the space-time guardian appointed by Titan, he had to maintain absolute silence. Even if my heart is bitter, I can't spoil it. Nosdormu was a little surprised to see Malaiko's become like this in the main timeline, but he was more relaxed. Killing a brother who was already dead was much less of a psychological burden than beating him to death. Izura sighed. My brother, let me help you free yourself from this crazy nightmare. Although Alexstrasza was reluctant, as the leader of the Penachet dragons, she had the self-awareness of being a role model. She raised her head, and her voice spread across the sky. Malaiko's, my brother. I feel very sorry for what you have gone through. However, the duties that the Titans have entrusted me with make it so that I have no choice but to announce that the Dragon Slumber Temple has officially relieved you of your duties as the Guardian Dragon. Next, we will purify you as a blasphemer. Accept the divine punishment and rest your soul in peace. Malaiko's was in a mess in the wind. In fact, he was the one who suffered the biggest blow. What happened to the King of Magic? How did he suddenly go from a high and mighty guardian dragon to a street rat that everyone hated? The determination of his brothers and sisters, the various ancient dragons who were originally doubtful but now had firm eyes, and the blue dragon subordinates who were originally obedient were retreating. He had always felt that the whole world revolved around him, but now he suddenly felt that the whole world was full of hostility towards him. Malaiko's was already a little crazy, and now he was even more unable to accept reality. Why? 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 This was Malaiko's question to himself, and also to his former brothers and sisters. Alexstrasza's eyes were full of sadness. Malygos used to be such a positive and optimistic blue dragon. It was hard to look back now. My little brother. Come to think of it, your glory ended 10,000 years ago. Yes. Since 10,000 years ago, when the arrogant Malygos was severely weakened, he still did not hesitate to cooperate with almost the entire Blue Dragon army to take revenge on Nesario. Everything was destined. Destined madness, confusion, and the end of the road. Either this or that would always lead the mentally ill Malygos to the end of the road. Alexstrasza couldn't help but sigh at this cursed fate. It was not that Duque did not remind her, but she was always emotional and blinded by family. The Red Dragon Queen roared at the sky. That was the order to attack the entire Sleeping Dragon Coalition army. Kalegos's performance was brilliant. He rushed to the Blue Dragons who were still loyal to Malygos and shouted, "My fellow Blue Dragons, our king is long dead. He is already a slave of the Lich King. If you don't want to become a zombie dragon and be buried with him, surrender immediately. Lower your altitude, lie on the ground, and show the emblem of the Sleeping Dragon Temple." This was the Blue Dragon version of giving up and not killing. Perhaps King Malygos had broken the hearts of his subordinates in the past 10,000 years. If it was not for the fact that he had participated in the killing of Nesario, not many Blue Dragons would have taken him seriously. Now that the old king was dead and had become a slave of the Lich King, naturally, not many Blue Dragons would be loyal to him. They were even more cowardly than stray dogs. They quickly dropped to the ground and lowered their noble heads to the Sleeping Dragon Coalition army, which represented the supreme force of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. No. I'm not dead. I'm still alive. My heart is still beating. Why are you all looking at me like that? In the sky, facing the 4 dragon aspects that surrounded him, Malygos was still arguing with himself in a neurotic manner. At this moment, an evil and vast will suddenly descended. He had the deepest aura of death, the coldest will, and the most evil and cold voice. He was, of course, the mastermind behind this, Lich King Arthas. A huge illusory head appeared behind Malygos. Malygos. From the moment you came to the Ice Throne, you were my possession. Yes, you are already dead. It is I, the great Lich King, who personally granted you eternal death. Arthas, whose face was covered by a blue-black ice helmet, only had his 2 blue eyes flickering. Chapter 1590. No. Impossible. I only suffered a small injury. Malygos used his claws to dig at his chest in vain, as if he wanted to dig out all the rotten flesh there. However, his claws had only touched the edge of the black heart when his body twitched in pain as if he had been electrocuted. Idiot. Still not accepting reality? Arthas was a little tired of facing such a deranged fellow. On the other hand, if Malygos was not in such a state, he would not have been able to capture a Dragon King so easily, even with the home advantage of the Ice Throne. At first, he seemed to be a little angry, but then Arthas sneered. Forget it, you've already failed. Then I'll take back what belongs to me. In any case, no matter what, victory will only belong to me, the Lich King, Arthas. Following Arthas' declaration, Malygos suddenly let out an earth-shattering scream. No, it should be called Death Wail. That was the resentment towards his inexplicable death, the resentment towards all living beings. This kind of howl on the soul level, even as strong as the guardian dragons were momentarily stunned and unable to move forward. Malygos' dragon body was changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. On the black heart that was clearly visible in the rotting hole in his chest, the aura of death that had been nurtured for a long time pulsed at high speed to every corner of his body. The beautiful blue scales that had been as blue as the sea on a clear day became snow-white, a paleness that symbolized bones and death. The dragon skin that relied on flesh and blood to support it shriveled, and the originally bulging dragon body instantly became thin. In all of Malygos' joints, white bone spurs broke through the tough dragon skin and grew out. The once gorgeous blue dragon king had turned into a ferocious and terrifying monster of death in just 10 breaths of time. At the same time, his control over magic power did not degenerate with the passing of his life. The entire magic pivot responded to his summons and bloomed with even more dazzling arcane light. Not only that, in the lower part of the magic pivot, a large number of monsters rushed out. Everyone looked and was shocked to find that not only were there dead dragon men and half-dragonmen, there were even dozens of blue dragons that had long since become corpses. Oligos exclaimed, "By the Titans." Maligos said he sent them out on a mission. At this moment, there was a commotion at the back of the dragon's slumber shrine. A violent snowstorm suddenly appeared in the sky. Needless to say, this was definitely the work of the Lich King. More importantly, taking advantage of this snowstorm, the eyes of the hundreds of blue dragons that should have died long ago on the North Wind Tundra battlefield suddenly blossomed with a fierce blue light. Flapping their battered bodies, they flew into the sky and fiercely attacked the sleeping Dragon Alliance army. Alago's dragon face turned pale. Heavens! His Majesty, no, Maligos rewarded us with some delicious meat after he returned. Ugh! He was already forcing himself to vomit. Plague was the specialty of the Scourge army. In the past, Kel Thuzad had used the plague to turn the Rotterdam kingdom into corpses. Now, his target had changed from humans to dragons. No one knew if Maligos was conscious or subconsciously manipulated to poison the blue dragon under him. Anyway, it was an indisputable fact that the blue dragons that had died on the battlefield had all turned into corpse dragons. At this moment, Duque suddenly understood why Maligos still slapped the red dragon Crystasa so hard in this life. Maligos didn't know that he had stepped into a land of death, but his survival instinct still drove him to leave descendants for himself. The Red Dragon clan was a clan that represented life. It was probably because of this instinct that he pushed Crystasa forcefully. Sigh. Duque sighed. Looking at the corpse dragon Maligos that had started to go crazy, Duque couldn't help but feel pity for him. A pitiful dragon must have something hateful about him. Everything was a cycle of karma, retribution. The scene became chaotic. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Arthas gave Maligos a death order. "Maligos, my mount, come back. Your mission is complete." Originally, Arthas' idea was to get the benefits first. As long as the corpse dragon Maligos safely returned to Icecrown Fortress, the strength of the Calamity army would definitely increase greatly. Unfortunately, just as Alexstrasza underestimated Maligos' mental illness, Arthas also underestimated Maligos' ego and arrogance. Perhaps, in Arthas's imagination, Maligos, whose soul had already been captured by him, would listen to his orders and escape during the chaos. In reality, Maligos had gone crazy. "Duke Marcus, it's all your fault." Maligos, who had already transformed into a death dragon, didn't take the opportunity to escape. Instead, he charged at Duque. Huh? The dumbfounded Duque felt like he had been implicated. The next second, Duque laughed. Let's just say that he laughed out of extreme anger. Me too, I actually took a lunatic seriously. If I took it seriously, I would have lost. A spiraling golden flame rose from Duque's raised right hand. It was the officially named Song of Light and Darkness, a personal artifact of Duque. The holy golden sword was raised high. Bystanders could only see the golden light shining on the tip of the sword, but as the king of time, Nosdormu saw something else. Time passed quickly. The scene before him seemed to have happened in a future that he, as the Bronze Dragon King, did not know. After Duque pulled out the sword, what he was about to do was to return the fate of Maligos' death to its original position in a strange trajectory. Nosdormu looked at this scene in shock. Time was still flowing, but it returned all cause and effect, leading the entire world to a brand new future. What kind of power was this? Or was what he saw purely an illusion of a tributary of time? Before Nosdormu or the other two veteran dragon aspects could react, Duque had already activated the special effect of the sword, Demon Slayer. It was not inferior to the golden light released by Valen at all. The holy light made Malygos feel a tingling sensation all over his body. His weakened nerves and lost dragon body would not feel pain. It was pain on the level of the soul. This pain brought him a strange feeling, and he suddenly fell into a trance. At this moment, Malygos heard a cracking sound in the air. He raised his dragon head and found that the arcane energy he was so proud of had actually solidified, forming a strange blue solid substance that looked like dough. It floated in the air. Chapter 1591. Only then did Malygos notice that the solid arcane elements that looked like pieces of plasticine were surrounded by white mist that emitted a cold aura. The arcane elements were divided and wrapped by the frost elements, turning into strange purple-blue ice particles that rustled down from the sky. At some point, a piece of white frost was climbing up Malygos's right paw. Ice instantly formed in the gaps between his fingers that he didn't notice. It wasn't until he accidentally moved his toes that he realized that his legs were creaking. As soon as he opened his toes, there was the sound of ice shattering. The former Blue Dragon King was shocked. This situation made him realize the seriousness of the situation. He finally realized that he was losing control of all the elements. He subconsciously and pessimistically believed that his power had greatly declined. In fact, he was really wrong this time. As the king of magic, how could his control of the elements decline so easily? However, the magic circuit was a derivative of the soul. A moment ago, Malygos had officially gone from a half-living state to a pure dead person. His soul was undergoing a drastic qualitative change. In fact, although the magnitude of this qualitative change was great, the process was quite short. As long as he calmed down and quickly found a new soul sense, he could regain his combat power as long as he found a way to manipulate magic power in the soul state. Didn't you see how Anastrian, the Sun King, was very good at fighting when he first became a lich? The funny thing was that thinking too much was also a kind of psychopath. Psychopaths couldn't help but let their imagination run wild. Arthas had tried to preserve Malygos' spirit as much as possible in order to make him a death knight like Zul had trained him to be. Now it seemed more like a bad move. Psychopaths were double-edged swords. In Malygos' imagination, since Duque could cut off his sources of frost and fire elements, he should be able to cut off his arcane elements. As a result, when Duque attacked, he foolishly gave up control of the arcane elements. The process was so smooth that even Duque was surprised. He would be a bastard not to take advantage of it. Duque accepted the control of the arcane elements that Malygos gave up without hesitation. The group of blue dragons, no matter which faction they belonged to, all looked at Duque, who was in mid-air, as if they had seen a ghost. Even though the king of magic, whom they once worshipped and obeyed, was still in mid-air, they could not suppress the fear rising from the depths of their hearts. If he didn't know that Duque was a close ally of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, perhaps even Calegos would have hurriedly backed away from Duque. Duque was too terrifying. Even in the face of the oldest king of magic in the world of Azeroth, he could still seize control of all elements in an instant. Without magical elements, the mighty king of magic was nothing more than an undead dragon with a slightly stronger physical body. The purest ice element surrounded Duque's body. Due to the strong winds beneath his feet, the chill that emanated from Duque's body was so intense that even the ordinary dragons that were slightly closer to him could not withstand it and flapped their wings to leave. Onyxia looked at her master in surprise. This was the first time she had seen Duque like this. In her impression, Duque was like a modest gentleman most of the time. Although he was more ruthless than anyone else in crucial moments, he rarely displayed such a threatening aura. Perhaps this was the so-called fight of the same origin. There was only one origin. If you took more, it would naturally take less. In the past, they were in the same trench, so Duque could not make a move. The situation now was completely different. Not only did Duque want to be ruthless, but he also wanted to take half of the origin of the next Blue Dragon King. Duque, who was familiar with history, obviously knew what kind of person the next Blue Dragon King, Calegos, was. Apart from his appearance, whether it was before or after inheriting the title of Dragon Aspect, this fellow was a complete trash. If Onyxia could be said to be a low-level version of the Dragon Aspect, then Calegos was used to make up the numbers. Duque did not want to divide the power of the magic net into dragons or mortals. The magic net is mine, and I have the final say. Use it if you want, or scram if you don't. Hence, Duque's sword was not only to kill Malygos, who had submitted to the Lich King. It was also to seize the authority of the Blue Dragon King in Azeroth. Malygos' hoarse voice seemed to come from the depths of the icy hell under the frozen throne. His blue eyes glared at Duque, and he gritted his teeth as he roared, "I knew you were a despicable thief. You stole the elemental authority that belonged to me. Alexstrasza, look at what you've done. You raised a despicable person who stole the power of the Dragon Aspect." The Red Dragon Queen was stunned. Even she was speechless at this crazy dragon who did not even know his own position. "You, Malygos, are already the servant of the Lich King, and you're still calling me a thief, damn thief. Very well, I, Malygos, will let you have a good taste of my anger." Duque could not listen to it anymore. He put his sword behind his back, and when he got into a forward stabbing posture, there was a flash of holy golden light. The next second, Malygos screamed. When he raised his dragon claws, he suddenly realized that something was wrong with his body. His dragon body was strangely dislocated, and his upper body flew out as he pounced. The lower half of his body seemed to be fixed in place by a spell that stopped time, not moving at all. Crack. There was a crisp sound. Miraculously, all the dragons saw a golden spot of light appear on Malygos' waist. The spot of light quickly became a horizontal line parallel to the ground, and it continued to extend to the left and right. At the same time, with Malygos as the starting point, there was a golden line that connected Malygos' back to his lair, the magic pivot behind him. The golden line pierced straight into the huge Blue Dragon Legion's encampment. In the next moment, the golden line swung to the left and right, and then a ripple line appeared in the void. This line swept across Malygos' dragon lair, and with the golden line as the boundary, everything broke in the middle on the spot. There was a soft crack, and at the same time, it split into two halves, from top to bottom. Time seemed to have frozen. The word astonishment was written on every dragon's face. Malygos' dragon face was full of horror. Like a female dragon that had been raped, he screamed, "No!" Because he realized that he had not only lost his body and power, but also the unique rule of Azeroth that was originally under his control. This was what he valued the most. Chapter 1592. To be honest, would Duque be afraid of Malygos? How was that possible? Even if the Blue Dragon King was at full strength, Duque would not be afraid at all. What had always restrained Duque was his good relationship with Alexstrasza and Isra. The Temple of Dragon Slumber had always been the first line of defense against the Burning Legion. If not for this relationship, after Duque became a demigod, he would have taught the crazy Malygos how to be a qualified dragon aspect. Come to think of it, even if Duque went all out under normal circumstances, he still would not be able to kill Malygos in a second. After all, he was a dragon aspect that had been blessed by the divine power of the Titans. The reason why he was able to split Malygos in half in one move was that Malygos had courted death himself. More importantly, the former Blue Dragon King was not used to his current situation at all, from his body, to his mind, to his soul. The disorder in his soul caused him to temporarily lose control of the arcane elements. He had the entire magic core that had stored 25,000 years worth of energy, but he could not use even a little bit of it. The disorder in his body was because he was not aware of it. He did not realize that he had changed from a righteous creature to an evil undead creature. Needless to say, he didn't even realize who was his master now. He did not understand, did not accept Arthes's kindness to save him, and instead dug his own grave. Everything added together formed this exaggerated scene before them. The dragons all thought that Duke had only caught the last train in God's domain and that he still needed a long time to cultivate. However, Duke had actually killed the king of magic Malygos with a single move. Shock. Shock. Before Alexstrasza had recovered from the car accident in her emotional world, she had to face another shocking reality. Duque might already have the strength to stand on equal footing with her. Perhaps it could be attributed to luck, planning, and execution, but as the Red Dragon who had been watching Duque since the second battle at the Dark Portal until now and watched Duque's growth and rise, no one in the dragon race knew Duque better than her. Even so, she still felt that she had underestimated Duque. Originally, they had predicted that there would be an earth-shattering battle. After all, the other party was a powerhouse and had the advantage of defending their territory. Who would have thought that gathering so many dragons and gathering the other 3 5-colored guardian dragons at the demonic pivot would result in such an unexpected outcome? It was as if all the dragons flying in the sky had become witnesses to the battle between Duque and Malygos over the origin of magic. Arthes, the Lich King, who had been sitting on her ice throne and watching the drama unfold, suddenly stood up in shock. After a long time, she finally managed to squeeze out 3 words, "Damn it." As long as Malygos wasn't so stupid as to turn into a dragon and come under him. Not only could he spy on the higher level of the magical laws of this world, but he could also cause a real rift in the hearts of the dragon aspects. He even fantasized about the day when he could use the cracks in their hearts to make all the dragon aspects fall. This was not impossible. In front of them was Nethario, the Wing of Death, and behind them was Malygos, the King of Magic. Who could guarantee that the other 3 dragon aspects wouldn't fall? But now, because of Malygos's temporary stupidity, all of Arthes's plans were ruined. Bastard. If I had known, I wouldn't have set up so many schemes. I would have just taken him as a mount. Just as Arthes was throwing a tantrum, Malygos was actually putting on a clumsy performance, acting dumb. Oh. No. Duke Marcus, you despicable mortal, what did you do to me? Do you know that you are guilty of the most heinous crimes? Malygos spat like a resentful woman as he waved his front claws to grab his lower body that was falling from mid-air, in a futile attempt to reattach his lower body. Was this crazy dragon really not here to be funny? If the atmosphere wasn't so serious, Onyxia would probably have laughed out loud on the spot. Duque used Holy Light to activate the Song of Light and Shadow in his hand and broke Malygos' spine with one strike. It could be said that the key joints of the entire dragon's body were all holy light. Unless Malygos could cross the line between life and death and turn himself back into a living dragon of the Order faction, it would be impossible to reattach his body before the remaining holy light energy was cleared. Originally, whether it was Duque or the 4 dragon aspects, they should have taken advantage of his weakness to take his life. An unexpected situation disrupted all of Alexstrasza's plans. After the dragon aspect's holy blessing was removed from the insane Malygos, all the exclusive laws that the Titans had bestowed upon him should have been taken away. Now, because his soul and body had unexpectedly collapsed prematurely, dazzling light burst forth from his body, and countless shining Titan runes flowed out. Alexstrasza turned pale with fright. Not good. Kallegos. Hurry up and gather these runes. If you lose the inheritance of these runes, you will lose the mystery of the Void Protection Matrix. Kallegos was stunned. He hesitated for a full 3 seconds before he reacted under Alexstrasza's urging. The structure of the dragon race was very strange. Within any dragon race, there was no such thing as a second brother or a second sister. After the dragon aspect, there were a bunch of ancient dragons. Even among the weaker black dragons and blue dragons in Dragon Ding, there were still 8 to 10 ancient dragons of this level. To be honest, Kallegos was not mentally and physically prepared to inherit the name of the dragon aspects. First of all, he was not strong enough. He had all sorts of weak performances, and it was almost impossible for him not to be seen as the shame of the blue dragons. Secondly, he raised the flag against Malygos purely because he felt that it was wrong to gather all the mana in the world for the dragon weave to use. Moreover, he was the most handsome of the dragon race. Not only did a female dragon like Martagosa love him so much that she was willing to go through fire and water for him, there were also many ancient dragons who liked him. Anyway, the group of blue dragons had been unhappy with Malago's madness for a long time, so they might as well make a big deal out of it. With Alexstrasza backing him up, there was nothing to be afraid of. They had thought that this would be a grand negotiation or something. Who knew that things would take a turn for the worse, and Malagos was actually already a dead dragon. Even his position as a dragon aspect would be forcibly removed. Calegos did indeed have the qualifications to inherit the Blue Dragon King's position, but he was not prepared enough. As soon as he came up, his limbs were in a mess, and he almost instinctively grabbed at the floating Titan runes. Seeing the group of dragon aspects want to die, they were all speechless. When she saw Calegos accidentally shatter a Titan rune, Alexstrasza finally said, "Duque, go and help out." Chapter 1593. Picking up scraps. Was he trying to put a mouse in a rice jar? The serious and sanctimonious hypocrite Dumuk did a good job of concealing his inner joy. No. If he were to be serious and show his joy on his face, wouldn't he be laughed at? Hee. This was a great benefit. If the power of the four elements could still be explored by oneself and reverse-engineered methods and magic formulas, then the high-level laws of the arcane were really not something that could be easily obtained. The magic that came out of the dragon race in the past was already a very rare emasculated version. After 25,000 years of development, some had been lost and some had been changed beyond recognition by later generations. If he wanted to get his hands on the primordial laws, he had to work on Malagoth. Under normal circumstances, the Titan runes that had exploded would definitely not be touched by Duque. Unfortunately, the successor was not strong enough. The pentashade dragon aspect only corresponded to one type of law, and the other dragon aspects could not touch the Titan runes of the magic type at all. But the dragon's sleep temple could not just let the Titan runes scatter everywhere. This was an even bigger matter than the betrayal of the dragon aspects. If there was a traitor, they would just have to kill him. Losing the runes was a great crime for the dragon's sleep temple. Although the Titans had not returned to Azeroth for more than 20,000 years, a group of Titan guardians still faithfully performed their duties. Not to mention those far away, just in Otter next door, there were several guys who were at the same level or even half a level higher than the dragon aspects. Once the blame was placed, even Alexstrasza would not be able to bear it. Duque was a guardian recognized by the soul of Azeroth, after all, so it could barely be considered as a leak. In any case, other than glaring at him, the four dragon aspects could only charge over like a swarm of bees. They would first get rid of Malagos, who was foolishly playing with his corpse puzzle, and leave the easy pickings to Duke. Duke could disdain to do lowly things like plucking feathers from geese and robbing people while passing by. Was there a need for Duque to take away some of the Titan runes? Nonsense. If they could just make a copy of the instance dungeon, why did they have to make it so ugly? In the eyes of a bystander, every single Titan rune was made up of thousands of smaller runes that were pieced together in an irregular manner to form a unique magic circuit, which then became a fixed law that was equivalent to the origin of magic in this world. The Titan runes were so complicated that it would take an ordinary mage 8 to 10 years to study a single rune. Was Duque an ordinary mage? Stop joking. With the help of the system elf, Duque had long since started researching and analyzing the Titan runes. With the foundation of observing the four great guardians in Alkavon's treasury, Duque already had a deep understanding of the Titan runes. He also had hundreds of millions of contingency plans in the system. All he had to do now was to compare that part of the runes with Malagos runes and deduce the possible magical laws and reactions. On the other side, 2 of the 4 dragon aspects were tearing up, while the other 2 were expressionlessly dismembering the dead Malagos. It was only a matter of time before Malagos, who only had half of his body left, was dismembered. Even a fool could not save him. On the other side, Duque was happily picking up the runes. On the other side, Kael'Thas had a bitter look on his face. The Titan runes were not something that could be picked up just by touching them. Every Titan rune contained its own unique law. If different types of elements or existences touched it, the rune would trigger a self-destruction system and collapse on its own. On the contrary, touching the corresponding law or element would slow down the reaction and become peaceful. However, this was only temporary. In order to truly return the runes to their original position, there needed to be a qualified carrier to engrave all the Titan runes into a powerful soul of a specific attribute. However, he suddenly realized that not only was his efficiency low, but his soul's ability to carry the Titan runes was also far from enough. As it turned out, Duque's work was even smoother than his. Left with no choice, Kael'Kas shouted, "Your Majesty Alexstrasza! I can't carry all the Titan runes. Can Sir Marcus help me carry some of them?" Red, green, and bronze, the three different skin colors of the dragon aspect's eyes bulged at the same time. It was a spectacular scene. It was fine to let Duque try it out. Your King's successor can't even carry the complete inheritance. What are you doing? Alexstrasza, who had never been particularly good-tempered, could only suppress her anger and asked, "What do the other dragon aspects think?" Nozdormu, "It doesn't matter." Onyxia, ditto. Isra, "That's the only way." The red dragon sister glared at the useless successor Kael'Kas, then turned to Duque and shouted, "Duque, please take care of the Titan runes for a while until Kael'Kas recovers. Then, please transfer them back to Kael'Kas." "No problem. I swear I won't peek at the Titan runes belonging to the blue dragons." Just as Duque finished swearing, there was a sudden clap of thunder in the distant sky. Boom! A white light split the sky in the west. Duque didn't believe it. "As long as Sir Kael'Kas needs it, I will send the runes back at any time." Rumble. Two bolts of lightning appeared in the north and south at the same time. "I, Duke Marcus, swear in the name of the demigod of the Azeroth weave." Rumble, 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 rumble. Lightning and thunder rumbled endlessly. Damn it! Which fellow Daoist is undergoing tribulation here? Get the hell out of my sight. That was what he said in his heart, but in fact, Duque flew towards the larger Titan runes that had a heavier burden on the soul. Small runes? Hee, this young master's system can analyze them in an instant, and I still have to pick them up a second time? The pure Kael'Kas didn't know. How could he know that Duque was this strong? All he could see was Duke shouldering the heavy burden and using his powerful soul to carry the large Titan runes. He was so touched that tears almost came out of his eyes. When he focused on picking up the small runes, his efficiency was greatly increased. One man and one dragon, they used the overflowing elements to maintain the floating Titan runes as much as possible. Then, they temporarily absorbed them one by one and fixed them on their souls. It took more than an hour for them to finish. During this time, the tens of thousands of giant dragons of the Sleeping Dragon Alliance surrounded this area as bodyguards. They couldn't go anywhere. On the other hand, on the ground, Lord Howl led the Warsong tribe's beastmen to kill the dead Draconians and Dragonmen. Maligos? That guy would have been torn apart long ago. Of course, his soul couldn't be captured. From the moment he was stabbed, the core of his soul was left in Frostmourne. Perhaps the next time they met, he could become a dragon soul lich. Chapter 1594. Kalecgos, who had only managed to pick up a small portion of the Titan rune, finally smiled. The human-like smile on his dragon face had charmed the female dragon fans. Unfortunately, his big sister, Alexstrasza, was not happy. Noob! How could you be so complacent after obtaining such a small result? Could you at least have some ambition? Although she did not say it out loud, that was what the red dragon sis meant. Sister, don't be angry. There's nothing we can do about it. Give Kalecgos some time. Maybe he'll be better. Isra used a soft voice to persuade his sister. Sigh. Each generation is worse than the last. When Kalecgos can be half as good as Duque, I'll have nothing to worry about. Look at that little rascal. In Du's eyes, the red dragon sis expression was clearly saying, you're the worst batch of students I've ever taught." Of course, Duque pretended not to see her piercing gaze. After getting such a great deal, he did not show off and instead angered the dragon. Looking at the system notification, Duque was overjoyed. "You've obtained Anti-Gravity Arcane Energy Thruster Initial Model. You've obtained Arcane Beam Cannon Spell Model." Although these things were from 25,000 years ago, they were still considered black technology in the present day. The most frightening thing about technology and magic was the lack of inheritance. With these Titan technologies, even if they were incomplete, Duque could still make a lot of good things. As for the red dragon's resentful gaze, there are so many ants today. Oh, there's even a Voldemort. The gentlemanly Duque opened the magic mirror right under the red dragon's nose and looked directly at the ants on the tundra hundreds of meters below him. Humph. The red dragon did not have a temper anymore. Let's go back. Matagosa, Calegos still need some time to digest the inheritance of the previous guardian. Take care of the magic pivot for him during this time. Understood, Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Matagosa nodded. A huge internal war among the dragons ended with the destruction of Malygos. Although it seemed a little anticlimactic, it at least prevented the already weak blue dragon army from further weakening. The adult blue dragons, dragon whelps had all been used as cannon fodder after Malygos had ordered them to attack the Alliance and Horde forces. This was the best way to preserve the Alliance's strength. In theory, as long as reproduction was encouraged, it would not be a dream for the Dragon Kingdom to prosper in a few hundred or even 1,000 years. Duque, who had obtained the greatest benefit, really wanted to hide and properly digest Malygos' relics. Even now that he had become a demigod, it was a very tiring task to calculate the usage of the Titan runes and the eternal laws within it with the system elves, which were almost equivalent to supercomputers. Blessings never come in pairs, but misfortune never comes alone. This old saying made sense. Just as Arthes was stirring up trouble everywhere and disrupting the rhythm of the northern expedition, something happened to Oder as well. Oder was always mentioned in the same breath as Odin and Odaman. Ulduar was the Titan's third base in Azeroth. It was now controlled by the storm giants and their servants, the crystal golems. That was indeed the case on the surface. After Duque publicly announced that Loken, the guardian of the Church of Wisdom, was a traitor, the Dragon's Sleep Temple had long regarded the entire Oder as a snake and a scorpion. Once they were free, they would beat him up. Dealing with Arthes, the blasphemer, was as important as dealing with Yogg-Saron, the enemy of the Titans. As soon as Malygos was dealt with, Oder sent a message. This time, it was Torim, the Titan guardian of the Church of Storm, who contacted the Dragon's Sleep Temple to ask for help. Duque narrowed his eyes after hearing the news. If Oder, which had never been disturbed by the outside world, developed as it had in history, Torim, the Storm Guardian, should still be normal at this point in time. However, Torim's development was not going well. Originally, when Torim's wife died in history, he initially thought that it was the doing of the storm giant, but then he discovered the real culprit, his former colleague, Loken. Knowing that he would be greatly weakened if he left the Temple of Storm, he still went to the Temple of Wisdom to get even with Loken. Then? Of course, not only did he fail, he was also raped. He was thrown into Oder by Loken to give Yogg-Saron all kinds of hardcore training play. Later, he became Oder's boss, and even his mount was given by Loken to King Vrykul, Imran. It was a classic case of losing everything. Duque had a good impression of this loyal Titan guardian. After all, a man who could risk his life to avenge his wife could be called a real man. In fact, Duque still remembered when he finished a series of Torim's missions in the game and saw Torim being captured. After that, when he attacked Oder and saw Torim's wife, Heve, standing beside him, Duque was touched for a moment. The guardian had already fallen. If he could reunite with his beloved wife, perhaps this would also be a kind of poignant happiness. Unfortunately, Duque was fed a mouthful of poisonous milk powder. That Heve was actually a female demon in disguise. Because even if Torim was contaminated by Yogg-Saron, a part of his will still couldn't be distorted, and he still missed his wife, Heave, in the deepest part of his heart. As a last resort, Loken found a female demon for him to pretend to be his wife and sent her to Torim as a mascot. The guardian fell at the feet of the players. But every player's heart was heavy. After witnessing the end of a tragic love, they didn't feel that this was a victory worth showing off at all. Fortunately, in this life, after personally participating in the general trend of Azeroth, Duque had the opportunity to change everything with his own hands. After receiving Torim's message, Duque immediately sent out his messenger. The Temple of the Storm was a temple located west of Oder, standing on the peak of a snowy mountain. It was surrounded by lightning all year round, and ordinary creatures didn't even have the right to approach the peak. At this moment, the giant sitting on the huge throne suddenly let out an "oh." The slightly wrinkled eyebrows instantly relaxed, and a smile appeared on his thick lips. In front of the temple, on the huge platform, there was a continuous flash of lightning. The densely packed thunderbolts hung down like curtains, forming an impenetrable vertical net. At this time, several clusters of lightning twisted in the middle, revealing a small hole. In the middle of the hole, an arcane energy that didn't belong to the nature element began to spread. At first, it was just an inconspicuous small dot. In less than a second, it spread into a portal that could allow one person to pass through. A very young human-like existence stepped out of the portal. He strode toward the temple. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.